Hello, I'm Eagle Gardens 1 on Instagram, and this is fucking talking shit with Eagle, episode 364. Got an amazing guest for you tonight. Of course, you should know who he is by now. Alex Hardy, how you doing? You want to tell everybody where they can find you, good sir?
You can find me on the Instagram at Harty Gear. That's HARTIGEAR. Harty Gear.
Well, I'm glad you were able to come back, my friend. The last time you were here, I had a great time, and I'm most definitely looking forward to having another good conversation with you. So I greatly
Yeah.
appreciate your time and your ability to come back, my friend.
My pleasure. I had a great time last time too. Getting back into spring here, I stay awake a little longer. I kind of hibernate in winter in those shorter hours. It's a little tougher to stay up late, but I'm pulling a double header today. And this morning, it was so apropos that my guest this morning on the Future Cannabis Project was Rizari NIG, who literally is 12 hours opposite. He's in India, falling asleep in the middle of the night there while we're interviewing him in the morning, right? And you get so many of these guests who were over further to the west side and ready to, or we're older or whatever, and we want to fall asleep earlier. And getting on your show, it might be tough. So it was the perfect double header for me to know. Well, our first show with Azaria fell through because he fell asleep on the couch. And it took us about a month to pull, or 2 weeks to pull it together here finally. But yeah, we were talking land races and how that works in breeding and stuff, and how people can better understand how the origins of the plant affect us in our daily gardens and such. It was a pretty cool beginning conversation to that, or a continuation to conversations we had 5 or 6 years ago. And he's done some amazing things too. It's pretty awesome to see. Don't ever think that you're not making an influence, bro. It's pretty amazing. People hear things, learn things, see things, and 5 years later, you're gonna see like, yeah, I heard it on Talking Shit with Eagle, and this guy's got some amazing thing going on. That is inspired by one of your guests or something you did. It's pretty awesome to see how the progression of thought goes. Things that my mentor taught me. We started these conversations, things that Alan Atkinson started in his PFA, Probiotic Farmers Alliance, which is where I started speaking publicly or teaching publicly, I guess, or semi-publicly online about how organics work. And some other organic farmers that I taught and incubated the organic farms here locally in Utah, they put me into this group online, and they're like, dude, it looks like a weed group, but it's not. It's like this really weird organic anaerobic thing they're doing in the group. You got to check it out. All this stuff spins out from the actions of others, and here we are teaching people. And I'm thinking tonight we're going to talk about organics, because that's kind of where you're headed, and that's kind of what I love to teach too, more than anything. Is how do we do this naturally?
Definitely starting to head further down the road of it to organics more and more. Actually, without saying anything behind the scenes here, I've been speaking with Smile a little bit. And when you had you on, I was doing the earth boxes against the cocoa, and they did well. They did well. To be honest with you, the earth boxes probably yielded compared to the cocoa, which was like 3 to 1 on the same strain. The terps were not different. I would say more complex on the organic side. Uh, it was a pleasant experience. I also had some ocean bounty, mixed in with some cocoa, which was a lot of dry amendments that he was considering organic and water only. Did super well as well. So with kind of both those going, I still love my cocoa. I still
Sure.
doing
No,
doing
we
well,
get set in our
coco?
ways and methods and particular. There's something like you hear so many people saying, "I grow the best," right? I grow the best. I grow the best, and so many people they're swinging around because they've dialed in a particular strain and method to meet their biochemistry needs, and for them, nothing else is going to work. And to them, it's the best, and so, but they give it to someone else, and they're like, okay. And this guy's going, no, man, this is the best, right? Because that's what seriously in your body, in your knowledge, and your medicinal need, you've totally have got that cocoa dialed into you for for how many 20 years you've been running it, right? So you can you've just done your first trial and you say they're comparable. Imagine after 20 years of growing organic, how dialed in and how much more advanced and to where you want it to be can be, right? It's a whole, but it doesn't even take that long anymore because your 20 years of learning cocoa through forums or whatever it was, the information pathways we had to learn stuff, go to a grow shop in prohibition time or whatever it was, is in a closet and small and not a whole lot of this going on where we communicate, where I've run over 300 cycles and can tell you my experience, right? But 35 years ago, I was waiting for 2 months to see an Ask Ed article to answer a question that was made up and not the one I was needing the answer to, right? So how did you learn that stuff? And so the learning curve is a lot shorter than the 20 years to get to where you were. It's like once you've learned the piano, picking up a guitar or playing a flute is a lot simpler because you understand music, right? But it's so, but a few cycles in, one of the truths about organics is your first cycle, if it's comparable, your second cycle is going to get better. Your third and fourth and fifth, and you start wondering, you get around to that seventh cycle and some living soil when you build one up and you keep on amending it with a top dress each time, and you just like, does it ever stop getting better? And yeah, eventually you peak out, you maximize, you have everything in full production, and you've reduced all of your least limiting factors of your system. And yeah, it gets to that point where it's like, this is just treason, and you water it and you feed the soil and you harvest the cream off the land, so to speak.
Well, hopefully someday I get there, but right now there's probably more dirt in this garden than there has been in a long time.
Right. Yeah. No, and there's a lot to like to be said about the cleanliness of a straight cocoa and rock wool, right? And you're doing this in your home, and it's not clean. You gotta be a lot cleaner, or should I say, or it's just like there's you have dust. It happens, right? So there's these different factors that it's like once you become this organic hippie guy, you're gonna have to grow hair out down to your ass too, bro. I'm kidding. Walking barefoot and no, yeah, it's but yeah, I've heard you discussing the whole pathway. You start learning about yourself, you start learning about the earth, you start learning about um you know, so many different facets of where this stuff comes from. Oh, we've been paying for water in a bottle to put it in, and it's like, but I can just get it from the compost pile. And a lot of what I've been teaching on my Instagram lately is proper soil science. There's a huge equation to really understanding it if you need to understand it, or you can like go somewhere like build a soil and see what Jeremy Silva's put together and just say, hey, give me I want to put it in gear and drive. And he's got package set up where you can just like go and you don't need to think about it. You just follow the instructions, right? Like in the Ratatouille movie, and they're talking about the dead chef is gone, and then they can't change his recipes because they're his recipes. We just follow the recipe, and that literally worked because you're repeating the exact same thing that was a success, right? That chef. And so there's a lot of guys out there who have these wonderful recipes they've developed over years, soil recipes that can go with a particular plant, just like somebody who grows in hydro has these recipes when they're going to increase the potassium or the phosphate, right, at a given day of a given week throughout the cycle. And some of these guys got that stuff dialed and know like it's gonna stack if I do it exactly like that, right? Well, with soil, you get to know like this particular genetic variety group might like a looser soil, and this one might like a, but you got to grow a lot to really figure that kind of stuff out. The more basic overall encompassing organic living soil systems really don't need to be tweaked out like that, to be honest. They have everything that's needed there, and it's alive, and the microbes are doing their thing, and moving organic matter into mineralization and chelating things that need to be chelated, and that's putting a carbon ring around a metal, right, and make it less toxic to a plant, more available to plant usage, because these things are needed as a micronutrient. There's a lot to really understand in it, but we don't all understand how our automatic cars work. We drive them just fine, right? We don't all understand how these computers work or this phone, but we know how to use it to maximize our daily, efficiencies and stuff like that, because somebody showed us. And there's a little learning curve. You remember when you first got your smartphone, right? It took you a minute to figure out how it works. And if you change operating systems, you go from Apple to Android, it takes you a minute to catch up again, right? One of my first biggest things when I went back into just soil, the big old body of soil, was realizing it takes 10 days, 2 weeks, even maybe 21 days, depending on how big of a vegetative plant you're growing, to get the roots to grow out into that and interact with the microbes, right? And everything to start getting that symbiosis going in the soil. And that if you try and vegetative top on a small root wad in soil, you're not going to get those results. So yeah.
There's of course little things you can do during transplant though, right? To help push them roots along. I found, if I do little things like topping, maybe even roughing up that root ball a little bit, does encourage, a little bit quicker root expansion.
Yeah. No, I just put out a video doing a potting up from 6-packs from seedlings, and showing how I totally, depending on what the root wad's like in that little 6-pack tray, kind of rough things up or not. But people kind of trip out. It's like, you can, if you do it right, you don't want your plants to be all wet when you're doing that, because you have everything in full turgor and the cells are expanded and they burst easily, right? You can also damage the soil structure when it's wet. If you work wet soil, you always want your soil more drier, not totally dry necessarily when you work it, but there's it's a lot swollen up, right? So you're not gonna, and the roots aren't grabbing it as tight. They don't. There's a lot that can, yeah. And so I just put a video on the Instagram that shows all of that. It's kind of neat. That's this from the 6-packs. And you go up from size to size. It definitely, if you can go directly in, you got the time and the space, you can go into the larger vessels straight out. It's going to do best. It grows faster and whatnot, but if you have cycles going, space requirements, plant counts or whatever, and you're restricted, you can keep things in the size. Opening that root wad, roughing up the root wad is something you do with any kind of plant when you're transplanting. Definitely, that's just standard horticultural practices. Definitely is something people should keep in mind.
So I'm kind of, I want to pick your brain, since we're talking about a little bit about
Sure.
the roots and different practices of manipulating the plant like that. I was talking last night. I got one of the girls back here, and she was a little little tall and scraggly. Taller and scraggly. When I buried it up, I buried her down and I
Right?
spread her apart. And so
Yeah.
basically, oh shit, I lost my camera. I knew that was
Yeah.
gonna happen. Damn it. Ah.
Good.
And hold on. And so when I buried her down, what I was trying to explain to everybody when I did it was, damn it, I'm gonna do it again. I have to hold it for a second and then turn it off. Was basically when they were down there for a minute, those branches would start developing roots and make that root system more massive. Almost make each one of these branches in time have their own root system. They kind of help push them along.
So did you kind of like air root them where you bent them into the soil? Is that what you got going there?
No,
No,
no, I just
they were just in a humid environment down there, and maybe from when you cloned it, they got so much that can happen too. So there's a couple things. It's humid. It's got that bush over the top that's holding moisture in there. There's not a lot of airflow going through it, and it creates that all that surface of those roots. They have advantageous meristem, and all throughout that green section of plant until it really gets woody. It tends to harden off and not have so much capacity for that stuff to do its thing. That's pretty.
uh, sorry about that. Just trying to mess with this camera real quick. I'm still here. Still here. I just had to turn it off for a second to
All right.
get
No.
it attached back up.
So you're talking about like it being all tall and skinny though, besides all the roots happening, right? There's a whole other thing where when you spread your canopy out, right? That's one of the best ways to increase your yields from a single stem is to pinch that down and get those side branches becoming tops, right? And so instead of having single top coming up, even if it's got multiple side branches, if you remove that single, okay, yeah, you're gonna lose that main cola that everyone wants that big donkey dick, but you're gonna have a whole lot more of these smaller flowers that less is more. And that's one of those things like when I flip, I prune the fuck out. The schwizzle is the cadizzle. If you know how to figure out how to do that right, and you give it a little feed right when you do that, and whether you're working that salt or you get into the organics and you learn how to make your own feeds and teas or extracts and whatnot, and the Korean natural farming is a whole nother level of making all those ferments and stuff. And I went through all of that and realized it's like once your soil's in place, though, that's extra stuff that you don't need except for if you got something off somehow. But which can happen. It can happen when you just kept feeding something in one plant which wasn't using it. And over a couple of years, you overloaded. Um, if you really understand how to read a plant, you can see that stuff. Um, Simple soil test kits work. And well over 200 cycles. The way my brain works, I only ever used liquid pH drops to check my entire system's chemistry. I could tell how much nutrient coming out of a bottle was available to the plant, how much they were using by observing them and checking against my 9 pH in the tap water versus how much nutrients I'm measuring in, and then checking the reservoir over time, right? And like most people are like daily, you got to check your ppm, your EC, you got to check your pH of the pen and all this stuff. I bought a ppm pen recently just for kicks and giggles to see how accurate my shit was that I was concocting. But that's the way my brain works. I don't advise that to anybody else. Get a molder's chart, understand basic chemistry, is so important to all of this stuff, whether you're doing with salt or organic. If you really want to understand it, or you just want to have a little grow and follow the instructions, that works too. The super simplest thing I like to, like the super kiss system is you go find a decent organic bag soil and at the Lowe's, in whatever box store you got or whatever. If you can find the local produced bag soil that's got more stuff mixed into it, it's awesome. There's some small soil producers all over the country. And then they've got like organic Job's tomato and garden general vegetable feed. Okay, and it's gonna have all the microbes you need in there. It's gonna have that balance of organic stuff that's pretty damn close to what we're looking for. You might look at the azalea feed, because it's more of an acid lover. There's the slightest of differences in the magnesium stuff, but those are by far, that is the simplest thing, because if you just want to grow some organic, just it works. It's there. It's all the same stuff you're going to get if you go and pick one of those recipes and build it up, right? But that's the more advanced thing, is you start to understand the texture of your soil and how your roots and your microbes interact in there with the different materials in your soil. Build those other things up and whatnot. So that's an answer that got pretty long to a question. You got any more questions though?
So do you think that would you suggest beginners, especially in an outdoor setting, to start more and start building like a bed in ground, above ground, or like mounds or hugel beds? Which would be your preferred systems?
If you get to grow in the outdoor, there's different ranges of manipulating your environment to the genetic. There's also manipulating your genetic to the environment. Okay, but say you have a specific genetic and you have your environment and you're pretty certain that genetic's going to work there. And you have a budget that dictates your range of what you're going to put that plant into, right? And how much or what, and your time and your energy. You got these different kinds of budgets that you got to abide by, right? If you just throw something in your soil without even taking a soil test, you're going to get a result. And it's going to be commensurate with the effort you put into it. Okay. You might luck out. You live in a sweet spot like Humboldt, dude I went to college with. I ran into firefighting. I was out in Arcata, and we stopped in to the bagel shop, and he was coming out as I was headed in, and he's like, "Oh man, I've never grown before in my life, but I put 13 seeds in the pound, or 12 seeds in the ground, and I got 13 pounds." Right? And like, that's Humboldt for you. You just stick it in the ground and it grows. Okay, but if you also just dig a hole and amend that soil, right, and then you all of a sudden you don't get a pound per seed, you've got 20 pounds per seed. Okay, once you understand how that whole thing works. So they're digging a hole, and they're not just filling it with potting soil or soil mix. They're amending that local soil with stuff to optimize the soil structure and feeding capacity. More and more, we're utilizing these people understand microbes for the past 20 years, just like everyone else, 30 years. And part of it was the nature of the beast that was happening because they were working in nature. And, but yeah, so you have these different degrees of like, and then what's your personal metaphor for interacting with nature or the environment? Like, all the pots in my yard are recycled, reused, right? And so I have a mishmash of things that I use, but I don't go out and buy a new pot, for instance. I don't go out and like a cloth pot has a 5-year lifespan, approximately, maybe 8. So, is that something you want to rebuild every 5 years, a 300-gallon cloth pot, or build a wood structure, and eventually it's going to decompose as well. that does the same thing as a cloth pot where we're using whatnot, maybe a little less. But you have that same, or do you get a big old 300-gallon plastic pot that they grow trees at the nursery at? Or do you dig into your soil? Do you want that terroir, that your native soil that you want to build up? There's these different factors, right? And so for me, I don't like to tell people what to do. I like to tell them all the options of what there is you can do and how they affect what your choices are going to be. And that empowers you to be able to drive that situation as you choose. And each of these different situations have a different benefits and detractors to them, right? I've shown some stuff on my Instagram. There's literally microphysics mechanics involved in why we use a totally different soil mix in a pot from the amended soil in a hole or in the ground, right? And for instance, if we look at dragonfly earth medicine's beautiful beds of organic matter, they build up 2-3 feet high, and there's walking trenches in between them, and beautiful organic produce that they put out. If I tried doing that here in the desert, one day of wind like we had 2 days ago just suck the entire thing dry and evaporate all the life force out of it, because no moisture would remain after one of our super dry desert winds blows out of the south for 4 days like it does here. I have to keep my warm compost pile covered with a sheet of plastic in order to keep it from completely drying out, and I'm still spraying it down, right? It's above ground and exposed. These are all factors. It's not just like so many people say my garden is the way to be. Follow me, follow my way, right? And it's like, no, there is no one way. There is, every single garden is different. Every single gardener is different. Every situation, and it can be as different as like the water on the other side of town from your bro. It could be where my home farm is and where my 5-acre organic vegetable farm was 14 miles away. I have pure sand at my home, and it's a heavy clay over on the other side of the valley there, right? And so these situations are huge in how you can interact with that soil, what you're adding to it, and how you water it. So you need to understand where you're at first to make that, you know. I always say, like, I'm not going to give anybody. My professors in forestry would put it this way: you can't give advice without about a forest without putting your boots in the dirt, right? And now we have this kind of stuff with internet. You could go and grab your soil and lift it up and show me, right? And I could look at it and I could see colors through, but trying to do that on a telephone or through primitive email 30 years ago is just not something that people could do. Probably people would still try to consult that way back in the day and tell people what to do and take their money for it, right? It's not necessarily my gig. I believe knowledge is power when you share it, because different things come from it than necessarily. I paid 80 grand to have my base of knowledge going to college in agriculture, right, and science and stuff. I was blessed to be able to do that, but the things when I teach that I learn or that stimulate other people's thought processes and change the world for the better for my daughter's children, right? Get back to why I do this stuff for the 7th generation, not necessarily my own benefit, because I've already lived a fucking amazing life and should have died 7 times. It's yeah, it's well, yeah. How do you? Another long answer to how do you dig a hole or do you put a pot out there? Yeah, I'm gonna do a whole learning thing where I'm debating whether I just go ask the manager at the shop whether, can I bring some duct tape and open up these bags and show people, and not even show the company, but I just want to show the people different soils in the bags, right? Because if I go through any box store or whatever, or whether Costco's got some stuff, I bought soil from Costco because it was a great deal on some amazing soil. And you're like, what? Costco said soil. When it's there and you know what it is, grab it, right? But if you don't know what it is and you just think it's a great deal, it's like I can walk in front of Walmart and see a great deal on a whole bunch of stuff that I would never want to. There might be purposes for it. Topsoil is a thing and it has a purpose, right? It's not necessarily going to be on a pot. It might go in improving your garden, the soil, if you have a really crappy garden to start with. The mechanics of pore spaces and gravity in a container versus the ground dictates whether those things get used and why. Kind of an interesting, like a whole aspect.
When does, like, something, this is when I was saying earlier that there's more dirt or soil coming into the garden. I kind of really hesitated about that because, like right here, this is an M3 mix. Has, a lot of peat moss, and other things in it. But it's got a shitload. It's got, vermiculite in it. It's got perlite. Do I consider that a soil?
Well,
Fucking
so
really? Not really. It has soil-ish. You know what I mean?
what is soil? How do we define soil? Right? So soil, that which contains life. Is it that which contains the roots? Is it the rhizosphere? Is it right? So there's a different ways of defining what soil is. So if we have a soilless medium and we put a plant in it, does it now become soil because it's got life in it? So there's a degree of where, yeah. So at what point? I use vermiculite, perlite, and peat moss and soil mixes, right? And then I add, if you add to those 3 items, for instance, just vermicompost, you definitely have a soil, and it's pretty much a damn near perfect soil, and it's organic, right? Because that perlite, that's just a mineral, okay? It's literally, perlite is volcanic glass. It's heat and expanded, right? It's pumice that's been manufactured because it was mined as obsidian and then run through a furnace. So it's exactly the same as pumice, but it's a lot finer structure generally, the way it's been blast heated. And quite often in the pumice, it's not a consistent form because it happened in nature. Hey, wait, Clover, get out of there. Get out of there. Get out of there. Sorry, my cat is like rummaging through the seeds, like she's making a bed or something. Get out of there.
No worries,
right? Yeah. And so yeah, those are just minerals, literally. Like people can freak out on rock wool, but what is rock wool? It's basalt. It's been superheated and spun out into these microfibers, right? So it's literally available to microbes at that point because the surface area is so great. So and so there's, in the long run, that stuff just breaks down by microbes once they're in your system. If you just throw it in the landfill, it's not available to microbes and it doesn't break down. But it's literally like a fibrous rock dust, and as it crushes into a fiber, you don't want to breathe that in, but if that gets mixed into your soil, it's all good earth. It's literally is like taking a basalt mountain and running it through a glacier and taking the glacial till from a basalt mountain and feeding that into your grow, which people will sell you. Now you're saying like people will sell you, you're worried about, there's all these soil companies. Which one do I choose? It's like, yeah, it doesn't matter what there is to be made money in. There's people going to sell you stuff. And it might not be in your best interest. It's going to be in their best interest to sell it to you, and they'll sell it to you. And they're gonna sell it to you hard. And that's why I'm giving you information to understand what it is that they're selling you, so you don't buy the wrong thing, right? Or what I advise people to do, I go out and I buy myself a bale of peat moss, sphagnum peat moss from Canada. That's not the peat moss that they give you disinformation for, where they say it comes from the bogs of London or wherever. It's not the same stuff. Okay, so when they talk about we're sequestering carbon or not, whatever, they're going to sell you cocoa on, and that's a whole nother set of things. Sphagnum peat moss is regulated on its consumption and extraction, and it's a forest product industry. And just like, excuse me, any other forest product that's well managed, it's in the best interest of the corporations that own that resource to not destroy it. They want to perpetuate that income source, right? So that's it literally, it's slowly renewable, but it's a renewable forest resource, and it comes from Canada. It's a lot closer, especially where I'm at. Perlite comes from close to me, 80 miles away. If you buy a bale of those things, perlite, vermiculite's gonna be the most expensive now. That's a kind of a clay. It's a natural clay, and not in the fine sense of the clay, but it has the cation exchange capacity. It's the silica, aluminum silicate crystal structure. Okay, and so that's a definition of a clay is crystalline structure that holds the provides for these cation exchange sites that we're looking for. You take the three of those, you mix them together, and this is what my science professors who taught me soil science taught me, and they developed for NASA. They developed a two-part hydroponic system original, and it's like, why did they have that for the perfect soilless medium? And it's also the basis of what I believe is a great soil. And then you add these organic matter into it. You add your vermicompost into it. You add these rock dusts in. This is literally crushed. This is humate, and it's crushed. I'm on small screen. I don't know if everyone else can see me there. But this is like rock dust that's been put into pellet form, and we call it humate, and it comes from the layers of shale between coal seams, right? And so this is all like stone that's been gone through the carbon process and come back to gosh, see if I can. Here's perlite, ultra fine white. That's basically it's obsidian that's super heated, and it becomes this. That's volcanic glass made in a. There's our vermiculite, right? So that holds water, holds it. So if you take those and you've got a perfect structure for a container soil, and you start adding in your organic matter and your organisms, you've got a pretty perfect soil to start with right there. And that's kind of how I base everything. And it's really inexpensive to build your own soil that way, where you buy a bulk bale of each of those, 3 cubic feet compressed or not, whatever. It's going to be just way cheaper and way better. You get a hold of compost, make your own compost, right? If you got the facility to do it. Worm compost is kind of one of the hard things to get. You can find a great source for that. You can team up with somebody. The two roller bin system you put on your back porch for compost is one of the best things you have. You put all your yard waste, you put your garden waste, you put your kitchen waste in, and you turn that thing every day, and you run one for 2 weeks, and you let the other one rest, and that becomes just black gold because you're oxygenating it. The microbes need oxygen. That's part of this whole structure of those 3 elements being the base of a soil. And any proper bag soil should have those 3 in it for a main component, if not about half of it, is my personal opinion, right? I see it, but and that's a container soil. Stuff that's going in the ground, guys that have developed these larger systems for larger containers and in ground, like Coots Mix, to me, it's a super heavy soil. But I started thinking about it. It's like, yeah, he was digging holes. He wasn't putting that stuff in pots. And that was more designed for people who are digging holes and putting it directly in the ground. And the structure of that soil is going to be a lot finer because gravity is pulling directly on it. And you don't have the capillary action pulling on both directions, to the bottom of the pot and the top of the pot, right? And so that plays into that whole thing where we're in a pot. You've got that capillary action physical thing happening. You need that larger structure. And it can wick as a bottom feed. Or you can have it. I like a perpetual top feed if you've got a recirculatory system, right? That's one of the best things. You mix up one of these organic soils like that, and you get a recirculatory system feeding. You can add in some nutrient to it even, and you can hybridize that stuff to maximize. You can smell the nutrients. You can smell. You can smell the microbes. You can smell all that stuff, and it's like if you put too much nutrient in there, you don't smell the microbes no more. And you realize, like, oh, that beautiful rainy day walking through the woods doesn't exist in the system anymore. I screwed up. I tried to feed the plant with nutrient and I killed the microbe, right? And you got to a new stage. And that's like if people want, that's their deal. They might want to find that's their space that they hybridize it, right? And that's a great and a lot of times that's just what you do because you didn't get that soil built properly as an organic soil, and you got to start feeding it. And you'll notice that happen, right? Yeah, that's a huge question, really. That's just like, what soil am I building and why? And just examining soils up close is a show in itself, right? Or literally, I'm going to be, like I said, I'm going to be making educational pods with Future Cannabis Project, likely going to be presenting these. We're discussing it, whether it's going to be like modules you can put together and pick and choose as a menu for a price type of thing. But my Pad 1 learners told me so much, doesn't matter how much I try and dissect the stuff, speak slow, put it in plain English, show pictures and props or whatever. It's so in depth that it just like, whoops, it goes over. You know, you hear a bunch of like, that guy said a lot, right? But if you're not sitting there taking notes, you don't have something to read to back it up, it's really hard to really absorb it, right? And so it becomes like, it's like motivational speaker. It's like, wow, that was great. And I go back to my regular life and it's like I got to deal with reality and like, what'd that guy say? Yeah, breathe. And so you have to hear, either watch the episode 10 times to get it, or you get these. One of the things I'm doing on the Instagram is breaking it into smaller chunks, basic, smaller, understanding, plain English, finding other professors who teach it and putting it in their words to back up what I'm saying, because I can be extremely blunt. And to me, it's just basic, but it's not. It's just something I've been doing for a long fucking time. So sometimes it's easier for someone who's just learning it to explain it because they're absorbing it and trying to. But the tough thing with that is sometimes they're regurgitating the wrong information, and that can mess things up too. So there's that whole balance of. It's nice when I have a Pad 1 that's good enough to give me feedback, like, yeah, man, it's great listening to it, but man, it's just like, whoa, what? There's too much, and yeah, it's the reality of it. You know, typing the stuff out in when we used to do this on Facebook, people would tell me it's like, oh, my woman would read this to me as I was cooking breakfast, right? And that was our morning ritual. She would read everything you had written to the group the day before, all the lessons you taught. It was all there in writing, right? My writing sucks as bad sometimes, but you know, that was part of some of the fun for some people, was translating what I wrote. My buddy Azarian, who we're discussing landrace with today, he was saying how he would translate it to his buddies in India, right? Out of the written word, right? And so it's a whole different thing when I'm just yapping away. And I know for me, I got to write stuff down or it doesn't stick in my brain hardly, right? Yeah, there's a lot to it. That's one of the you know, the closers to any question about organics.
Man, I tell you, I'm glad to hear that there is people still in land race projects or just outdoor breeding. I've talked about that a lot lately. That I think over in general, the importance of outdoor breeding has to stay. We have to, you know, there has to be people like yourselves doing outdoor breeding, because the more, I think in general, with all the indoor breeding that's being done, I think it's just weakening the plant overall to indoor conditions. And, it's very much limiting, be terp selection and amongst other things. Only so many indoor can only provide so many environment and challenges to where nature, storms, wind, animals, dry spells, and there's so many more factors that can bring out the true full spectrum of the plant, to where indoors we're limited by what little bit of light we can throw at it and what we can manage indoors. To keep it true, I think the breeding really needs to be kept outdoors.
There's both. There really is both. Finding those elite cuts for the purposes that they're used for requires controlled environments to where you bring out double recessives and stack them up, get them to work together, right? There's definitely there's balances to, like, throwing the seed out and seeing what survives versus people who sterilize the entire environment and they're changing the paper towel every day and they have everything exact temperature, and right. Those people in that environment are losing so much natural selective strength of the plant to root and drop a tap root. You'll never be able to take the results of that and throw them out and get anything to grow. They're not going to naturalize, right? They've become weakened. They don't necessarily going to have that, but they might find a particular plant that wouldn't survive the way I'm doing it, that has a particular terpene profile that's able to grow underneath. For instance, now we're all moving towards the LED spectrum lights, right? And it's going to be mandated, like in California and some other states, just as because the consumption of electricity is insane using the old school methods, right? So we progress, and some of these older strains that are lost, older things from the 90s, they were all developed underneath high pressure sodium that is kind of slowly fading away. There's not a whole lot of people that use a whole lot of it anymore. We're still mixing spectrums, but I know I faded away. I don't have one in my setup anymore. I could break one out if I needed to, if I wanted to chase something in that, but it's like I'm looking to the future and it's like, man, do I want to do my supplementing? And right now I'm using ceramic metal halide. I find that to be a very close spectrum to Earth, to the sun, the way I need it. But with moving into the LEDs, you can totally program those things. And literally, I can have an indoor environment where I'm mimicking a particular location on the Earth, sun for the season, right? And so technology doesn't hurt necessarily. It's a different avenue and direction of this amazing plant has, right? 70,000 uses. And so we're finding whole different capacities as we evolve as well, right? With our technology and such. So yes, I agree with you that it totally bottlenecks some things, but it's also part of the entire deal of what is cannabis, right? So it needs people like me and Azarian doing what we do, and the progenic results of our work, and then the inspiration that people hear us, and it's not going to be everyone hears our talks and says, yeah, that's me. I need to do preservation work, or I need to breed with that, right? But the people who are inspired by it are going to do their thing, and amazing things will come from it. That's how we do our deal, right? Yeah, it's kind of neat. He was saying, it's like, oh man, you're one of those people who never work. I'm like, oh well, I gotta confess, I got some elites in the closet now, right? The clone fairy, but what it comes to is selling or selling out, and it's true, selling at farmers markets for 20 years, right? I've sold vegetables and I've sold artwork, right? And just watching how people, and then literally studying the psychology of how people, consumers in consumer culture, respond to anything. One of them is familiarity, right? And this translates, and this is this little lesson of how the mind works, and we've been trained. if I was selling zucchinis, for instance, and I threw all sizes and shapes of zucchini in the box, I wouldn't hardly sell jack squat. No matter how many people needed zucchini, they'd look at it and they'd be confused because it's just like it's unfamiliar jumble of shapes. But if I line the zucchinis up and I put all the perfectly small ones together, then I put the large ones that were funky shaped together. The people who were after the big funky shaped ones would grab the funky shaped one. The people who are conditioned to the small ones and or prefer that for whatever it is they're cooking would just grab that, and boom, I would disappear and sell out because people who have that familiar, they're able to reach for what they're familiar for, right? And and so with that, we have product recognition, right? And people, they might look at my breeding projects and I have these names I developed over these years, and they look at it and like, well, what the hell is that? And they search for it and they can't find it anywhere on the internet because it doesn't really exist. It's me doing my thing under a rock in the desert. And it doesn't go when people trying to select for what they're going to purchase out of a gazillion dudes out there selling seeds. There's a lot of people who don't have this actual elite strain, but they slap that name on it because of name recognition, and they just want to sell a seed, right? And so they've got that, and it's the same thing with the soil. Okay, there's a lot of people selling all sorts of stuff, and there's not a whole lot of integrity sometimes. And there might be more integrity than we want to suggest, but a lot of times it's for the person who's selling, and their level might change on all sorts. There's people who truly believe that everyone's dishonest and that everybody's getting over on everybody. And that's the way the world works. And I trip out when I feel sorry for when I have to explain to people, it's like, no, that's not, I'm sorry, that's how you've been dealing, but maybe take a bigger look that there are honest people giving honest products for an honest price. But it doesn't cost cheap to do that, right? Really producing this stuff, it takes work. And for me to produce these lines from landrace, I need to sell a product that people might be more familiar with. It brings me out into the mainstream a little more if they're using these products that has a mainstream name on it, an elite cut that's come to me, and I'm crossing it with a landrace now, or one of my landrace polyhybrids that I'm getting ready to release, and releasing these hybrids of these things that people can explore. So there's definitely, again, that's a whole part of it. Joe Dirt talks about the scene with with the snakes and the sparklers, right? And the Indians sitting there trying to sell fireworks to fund his animal shelters, and he's got no clientele, right? And he's like, well, I got this. Where's the good shit? And he's like, oh man, this is the good stuff. I got snakes and sparklers, right? And to a lot of people, land races snakes and sparklers, man. Like, whatever, dude. You're growing a weed over there, right? And I got this polyhybrid, salt grown, fucking frost covered monster. It's like, yeah, but if you take what I did with these land races and put it in you don't even know what's good. Anyhow, yeah. So he teaches them about it's not what you like, it's what the customer likes, right? So now I can burn my snakes and sparklers, and I have my 16 animal shelters funded by my fireworks stand selling explosives that people want, right? And that's kind of, it's just like the artist. Am I selling? Am I selling out? Am I doing the modern design? Am I doing it my style? Right? You gotta make a product that people are gonna want to purchase, or you're just like spinning your wheels. And until they can understand the product and why you want to purchase the one that you're producing with a passion. And so here we are, right?
So
someone might be a little more
creating a product that people want to purchase. Faux times Faux in chat would like to know, Alex, which of your gear is newbie friendly, outdoors, and social? Thank you.
Social, newbie friendly. So pretty much everything can be grown.
SoCal.
Oh man.
Go outdoors. SoCal. Big difference.
Go for one of the Nigerian. If you can get something with them from me with a Nigerian in Southern California, I really think that stuff would just go phenomenally down there. I think you get these monster plants without much hard work. I know in Fallopian, Farmer Phil in the Bay Area. You know, he's an organic sativa guy, and I call him Dr. Skinny Leaves, and he grew one of the biggest fucking plants I've ever seen with some of that Nigerian seed, and he climbed up his, I think it's like a 16-foot ladder. If it wasn't a 12, then he was 16 feet up in the air grabbing this thing and bending it over. So it's like a 20 to 24-foot tall tree. And when the picture he shows, it looks like he's holding. It looks like, you know, you look at it and you think you see someone holding something with, you know, a couple of buds with their fingers, but you look at it closer and you realize, like, no, that's like the forearm, and like there's 3 giant colas the size of your leg, right? So that's the Nigerian, and it's an uplifting. It's a long. You want to grow it out 100 days, more like 90 to 100 days, and that Southern California, it's got that climate for it just perfectly there. And so any of my crosses of that as well, super uplifting, super cerebral. It's a great. Like you said, social, where you could burn that in the evening, and you're gonna get pretty. It can, some people say it's some of the most potent stuff they've ever had, and but it doesn't. It's not gonna knock you out. It's not gonna couch lock you. It doesn't have. It's not necessarily the opium replacement narcotic level thing that a lot of the stuff I'm breeding towards. That 13 though, so that's what you got there, is that 13 is across with the Nigerian, and that hybrid with the OG Dr. Dream, that can really be a sit you down and make you contemplate the universe type of thing if you ever do it. But yeah.
Thank you for that, by the way. I'm glad you brought it up. The clone fairy did show up today, and you know, I did try to look it up on the old internet, and I couldn't find much about it. I was hoping that you could fill me in.
No, and so
gem
since I have time for it, now that I'm working with Future Cannabis Project, and we have I think since I spoke to you, there's like some crazy huge actual history has been made that here in Utah we now have legally packaged collectible adult novelty souvenirs on the shelves in the garden store. So like this is shit I've been fighting for, you know, and we're still fighting for full First Amendment rights for and social ability for freedom for everybody everywhere. But just another step further is I've got 2 locations now that are partnered with selling my seeds for me, and that allows me now I can go onto the EU seed finder and start populating their information logs with my breeding projects, and that's one of their major criteria, is that you have to have somebody legit selling your seeds for you. But it's also, you know, I've been slowly just poking my head out from under the rock because I have real PTSD from having gone to, you know, been arrested by federal agents in all 3 North American countries for small quantities of my personal medicine. And here I am telling, you know, I've opened up, but I have a very firm First Amendment right. But it doesn't. There's still the PTSD of having 12 machine guns in my face in Mexico, or you know, literally several warrantless searches of my home here in Utah, and you know, helicopters flying over and all that shit. And just a couple of years back, before I even realized I created this law situation that affords me this right that I stand with now, firm stance. It's been backed up with multiple cases in circuit court and a active Congress that allows me to exercise my freedom. It talks like today with Azarian totally go to the heart of that, where there's nobody's going to come up with any color of law and say, no, dude, you're selling drugs. When I have these talks like that with Azarian, where we're talking about preserving genetics of world heritage and comparing to the rhinos that are going to extinct. And he's showing real time how in his life he's watching these wild populations being destroyed by urban expansion or urban sprawl that occurs, right? And it's the same thing here we have in America. It's our lifestyle, urban sprawl. And you grow up in a small town, you go back and it's a fucking cookie cutter, like just the city you just left, right? And so that's all a huge part of something I said there today with him. I like saying this: creation protectionism. And people get confused and they think that you say creationism? Are you a fundamental Christian? Like, no, it has nothing to do with that. And whether you believe it happened in 6 days magically, or you understand it took billions of years to come to the point we're at now, we're really, really small to think it's ours to use at our whim and destroy and throw away to the winds when the 7th generation beyond us is more than deserving, as well as it in its own right of existence, by the fact it exists, has its right to continue existing, right? And we have no place to think that we're any bigger or better than it because we have opposable thumbs and this phone to talk over the internet on, right? We might think so. We might think we're bigger and better than some other part of the creation, but those things are all, we're dependent on them existing. They're all part of the web of life that creates our ability to exist. And as we cut each one of those things out, our existence becomes bleaker and bleaker, right? And that's one of the reasons I like to really push towards organics is when you start understanding that stuff, you start realizing where your place is, and you're not so big. We're just a blip. We're just a blip here in the universal blink of the eye.
Sister Golden here would like to know, is anyone out there protecting their pure landrace strains?
You got a little muffled. Could you repeat the question?
Yes, absolutely. Sister Golden here would like to know, is anyone out there protecting the pure landrace strains?
Yes. We definitely. There's quite a few different people that do this, and so checking out like our show on Future Cannabis Project today is we're talking. I was talking with Azarian, the Indian Landrace Exchange, who it warms my heart how he described today how when we met and he was just starting his journey into this, and my teachings and conversations with him totally inspired him into this in-depth journey he's taking, where he's literally presenting land races from different regions of the world with a tour book that you can purchase. So you get 4 or 6 strains, and you go through, and he walks you through the villages and the culture and the terroir of those localities, and that's like the furthest end of like the most awesome of landrace preservation that's going on. But there's definitely a whole bunch of people who just have passion for it, who might be doing it in a closet, or there's also people on a large scale who do stuff on commercial scale level, because that's what. So there's definitely, and then if you there's an entire episode I've run through 2 hours of me rambling and explaining how the short definition of land race that people utilize just is inadequate, and these conversations we're having there on Future Cannabis Project literally expand this out. And I keep saying it's like every 5 minutes of this conversation we just had for 2 hours with a panel of the right 5 people can be another 3-hour conversation about landrace and understanding how growing it where you're at and why you would want to grow it. Why would, if you get passionate about preservation, the things you might expect and have to do, and there's ways of removing our own bias. It's really hard. I try to explain to people, it's like I'm selecting out of these however many seeds, I still got to select the 4 or 8 male and female that are getting crossed, and so I have this bias that still comes into it. How do you understand the color spectrums, the growing them indoors, and all that stuff? It's huge conversations. And light spectrum is massive how they respond. And our conversation today is describing how our efforts about 5 years ago to work in conjunction with, like, he's learning from me, he has a mission, he's seeing these plants being destroyed around him. I inspire him a little bit, but we're also looking at, like, he's going up in high elevation places and finding plants that he's sending seeds back to me to grow here in high elevations as a dedication to my best friend who died in the mountains, and bones are rotting away on the side of the mountain. Still, we never found a couple of pieces of them. And literally, like, we found a couple of his bones, and that's it. Like a vertebrae and a rib bone and maybe the long arm bone, and his feet were still in his shoes. But we never found the rest of them on the cliffs and the avalanches and went out. So I wanted to create this project where I dedicate, literally, I could go up and commune with them and smoke the herb that was growing in the earth. And so I'm talking to my buddy in India about selecting a landrace from a high elevation. And we were realizing it's like, where he was at is like it's summer conditions and it's snowing where I'm at, and I'm at a lower elevation. And we started looking at, and he's developed this entire concept of how we described, where he started traveling around northern India and across southern India and over, and having teams of people he interacts with who move over into Afghanistan and doing these collections and talking with the farmers, but really understanding how the plant reacts to the different places where the environment affects it, and how the monsoon comes up and hits the Himalayas and moves west because it doesn't got nowhere else to go, and how these plants all in the different, and you get into Afghanistan, it's totally dry, it's a totally different cultivar structure and growth structure, and so all this stuff that he got delved into, and he might have gotten there without our conversations, but he expressed today with gratitude that we had those conversations. And this stuff comes from my mentor, who like I was enthralled with it, and we got to talk, and he didn't know, but this is the guy that, it's just bizarre how this stuff works. We didn't meet each other before, but we were both working on these lawsuits, became this First Amendment right, that became an act of Congress, right? Before we ever met. And he had gone and traveled the world through the sweet spots and collected seeds and bred them together for years, and got bested by the feds. And they missed a pack of seeds and they handed them to me. And we ended up having a 20-year conversation about landrace, right? And he's brilliant. His parents were Nobel Prize winning cancer geneticists. So we're talking on like different levels. And we didn't have to use a lot of words sometimes. We talk about landrace. And here, 20 years later, after those conversations began, and 5-6 years later after my conversation with Zarian began, he's mapping these stuff that we could only have little private conversations about, and putting that information out for everyone to really understand why a plant does this when we do that in our garden. It might have to do with where its genetic originated on the side of the Himalayas, or across to the west in the dry zones of Afghanistan, right? Excuse me. Yeah. So yes, there are definitely there's a lot of us preserving them. There's different people have different definition as to what landrace is. My definition is extremely broad, and these conversations that we have on landrace, exemplify why it's not such a fine thing coming out of somebody's field exclusively, but there's extremely gray lines in between wild and the wild stuff is rare, but where it exists, there's interactions with domesticated. And so to leave wild out of the conversation of what a landrace is disingenuous, is one of the things I like to say. Yeah. Whoop. I fell over too.
That makes me
I got a fan
feel a little better.
Yeah.
So, friend of the show, Arthro Sensimilia in chat was wanting to know more about the New Mexico land grants.
Oh yeah, yeah. The Mexico land grant, right? This is so. Again, in this whole conversation, when we were searching for something to work for me to dedicate to my best friend, and we met through this group I produced on Facebook, the Landrace Traders Club, and there's about 1,000 of us in there, and there was no selling allowed, and our deal was like preserving, protecting the genetic and the origins of the plant, and then getting medicine to people who needed it. The spin-offs, all this came out of other people motivations to do their thing, and you just keep spinning off into these awesome sauce sidetracks. And so I was running that group and acquiring all the land race I could for my vault to work with. And fella comes into the group and says he's got this stuff that grows wild on his land in New Mexico. And we get to chatting and stuff. And he's really timid, really shy. I think he took his post down, and there wasn't, people didn't take to him too well because it's something different, something unusual. And then, but I negotiated a trade with them and sent him some of my green dragon, and I brought the green dragon, I believe. I think I sent him some other stuff as well. And he made one other trade with somebody who totally gypped him, ripped him, and the guy just went cold and disappeared. But before that happened, I got enough information about this. Sorry, you keep reaching up and my phone falls over. That's funny. Let's see. Let's see, maybe it's, I think it's sitting on, so I got rubber in both ways. All right. You still hear me fine? You're muted. Okay. All right. So I don't remember. I don't think I wrote down this kid's name, but he's the current don or owner of this land grant from 1700. Spanish King Ferdinand wrote out these land grants to all these guys who were running these haciendas in New Spain. And so they're good loyal subjects who had left and come over here and populated. They might even been a couple of generations in from their ancestors who came over as conquistadors and settled. And my understanding of what happened and when, by about 1600, there was some Spanish reals of either, well, there's one of the Catholic priest orders there, brown robes. And those brown robes were what we call homespun. It was hemp fiber. And so they carried their seed for their ropes and their robes and their everything along with them. And so it's not impossible that, you know, and there's historical writings about fur trappers going down and overwintering down in the Southern Rockies in these populated zones. So you can find this history from a couple of different directions, but that is very possible to have been populated there as a domesticated plant originally at some point prior to 1600. Anyhow, at some point along the way, it escaped domestication, and which any semi-wild plant will do, especially if it's being dry farmed, which they most definitely were using very small amounts of irrigation at times, and then you know, it's rainwater and whatnot, and using natural farming back, you know, 500 years ago. They would have dug some ditches, but it would have been more just with the monsoon and whatnot, the planting rains, the natives used for planting their corn and beans and squashes, right? And their three sisters. And they would have adapted as they went out and did different areas. Anyhow, very easily though escape if they're growing it for as well as fiber, if they're growing it for food, for seed, this plant has a very prominent large seed to it, even multiple generations into breeding. It stands out as a prominent food seed, oil seed. And so that kind of seed would have been eaten by critters or birds, whatnot, and hauled off, and it would have escaped cultivation pretty rapidly. It's extremely hardy seed. It's adapted to growing in the southern panhandle of the Rockies in the eastern central New Mexico. And the grandfather of the young man I got this from, he was the landowner descendant from the original grant recipient in the period of the beginning of war on drugs by Nixon, when he declared that all wild cannabis in America be eradicated. And at that time, there was quite a bit in the early 70s. There was wild cannabis all over, like Los Angeles County, for instance. There was wild cannabis all over the place. And it was a lot harder to eradicate from some of the places like ditchweed, okay, because it's such a perfect freaking environment for it. But a lot of the other landowners in his guy's area went through and eradicated. It only takes a couple of generations to really wipe it off the landscape when it's drying, just growing wild in a dry landscape like that. The young man explained to me that on the sides of the mountains, bare, rocky, just some needles, and fairly barren mountainsides, this stuff was just growing out of the side of the mountain. And on years where there was more rain in the monsoons and whatnot, it was really prominent and thick throughout the side of the mountain. And on drier years, when it was more droughty, it would only be growing out of the rills and in the arroyo basins, okay, where the more water would accumulate. But it continued and it perpetuated, and it's dropping a taproot down in. It's got this super strong taproot system to it. It's got it doesn't have a lanky sativa habit that we think of as the tropical sativas, though. It's got extremely skunky odoriferous to it. It's got a pretty good head to it when you bring it into a controlled environment to produce, and it hybrids wonderfully. It does have a lot of intersexing issues with it as a raw genetic, and that's why I'm breeding it out to a cultivar, so to release. And so I'm right now I'm working this, and I'm naming it for the fellow who did not kill it at the order of Nixon and were drugs, is Garcia Fernando is what I'm going to name the cultivar. And that'll be the first release here, and we'll see how the first round. So I have I guess I'm going, if we want to just utilize that, I'm going to my second generation from wild, right? I don't like to call that an F2 because it's inbreeding from something an F2 is a hybridization term. So I'm inbreeding an IBL, going into IBL2, and if I find a successful, less than 10% hermaphrodization rate with light stress, I might go ahead and release that level. I might take it to the next. We'll see how, but that's something that's I gave it 5 years from the time I acquired it, and that fella an opportunity to do the things I talked to him if he wanted to develop that or whatnot. But it's about time to get that out to people and have that available for us here in North America to strengthen some of these polyhybrids to a more localized, adapted backcross of landrace. So if you want to take that polyhybrid that's been bred to the poodle that can't survive on its own, you want to stick it to a wolf to make it survive in your outdoor environment, this is going to be that wolf. You want to backcross it and strengthen it and give it stem strength, give it hardiness, give it an ability to drop that taproot that's all been bred out, like Eagle was mentioned in earlier, in those indoor environments, right? So yeah, no, thanks for asking about the New Mexico land grant. You might see it under a couple of other names: 1700 land grant, old Spanish land grant, but as I inbreed it, it's going to be definitely Garcia Fernando in honor of the man who preserved it against federal orders, unconstitutional federal orders that would be. So yeah.
Again, from the same gentleman, he would like to know if you know about the Colombian gold grown in New Mexico, late 70s, that made the catalog in the California seed market.
I have not heard about Columbia gold being in New Mexico in the 70s, but I wouldn't doubt it. That definitely is before my time, and my uncles were restricted by my mother on what I got very little information out of them. They weren't allowed to indulge me. And so while they were professional growers in the family, I got my brother ended up getting a lot more out of them than I ever did. But I just I never wanted to push that trust level or whatever that promise they made, right? Whatever. I had a different relationship with my mom than my brother did, so all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So no, I didn't. I've not heard about that stuff. I don't doubt it. There's a really awesome movie though. That go on YouTube and look this one up, and I think it was 1970 or 1974 Acapulco Gold. It's a documentary. It's fucking awesome. And these guys go and they go down to Acapulco, they go down to Mexico, and my brother's gone down to Acapulco actually and been in the bandito camps right there where they grow that stuff and brought a little bit back. They couldn't sell it to him because the cartel would have killed him for selling it, but he traded him. He gave him had some 22 bullets, and they gave him a quarter-pound of Acapulco Gold and a gallon of mezcal, and that stuff was great, the real deal. Colombian Gold, though, I think is what you said. I'm sorry, Acapulco Gold. Great movie, and it talks about all these different what was going on back then, and the range from ditchweed to the high grade, which was stuff like these land races that would get imported. One thing my uncle did tell me about was they would bury things with dry ice to try and cure them differently. Right? You just dig a big hole and throw a plastic bag in there or some burlap sacks or whatever, and not plastic because you need the vapor out, but they would freeze dry it. And my father confirmed as well that the baby Hawaiian coming from my cousins in Hawaii was one of the super weeds back in the day, whatever. And I think it was, they called it primo because it was premature, and they would give you more of that racy head instead of that couch lock that could come from those long growing Hawaiians. I remember when I first got Hawaii bong hits, I'd sat down and hallucinated for an hour, like like we were in a room, a rich kid's room, and it was all done up as a tropical beach scene, right? And literally I melted into the fucking couch, handed the bong to the kid next to me, and my feet soaked into the raising seawater around my feet. And like, yeah, hour later, I'm like, what the? Yep, that was Hawaiian, man. We snuck that back on the airplane. Wow.
Hopefully it has a seed right. Hopefully there's one seed I can smoke out of that shit or plant. I'm always hoping anytime I smoke one good bud that I always find that bag seed. Get out of it to plant.
People bag on the bag seed because they got, the bad one, or they didn't go through the proper procedure when they grew it. They just assumed it was going to be some great seed. But I tell people, even when they're growing a pack of my fucking hybrid stuff that I spent all this time doing stress testing on, grow it like it's a bag seed and pretend like you don't know what it is. You don't know if it's going to harm. Pay attention to it. It's in a new environment, and you never really actually know with any of this stuff what a new environment or new stress or your water or your feed is going to do until it does it. It's like dropping trees. And I did 16 years as an arborist. I learned running a chainsaw from the best, the guy that wrote the book for the Forest Service, right? And he had an old gray beard when I was a teenager, and he took me under his arm and taught me some things. And when you're dropping trees, it's you do all of the math in the world and all the understanding of the physics of that tree and how the fibers grew and how they stand. It's a guesstimate until it hits the ground. You guesstimated to the best of your ability what's going to happen, and you've taken all the control you possibly can to prevent any ill mitigating the bad situations. But until the tree is laying on the ground, you're guessing what's happening, right? And it's the same thing with growing. Here's one I wanted to throw out there, and I'm hoping, and I'm terrible with names. I want to say, and so on the Future Cannabis Project earlier today, is it Bingus or Mingus?
Bingus.
With an M? Yeah, yeah. Okay,
No,
so
Bingus.
Bingus with a B. Right on. Okay,
Bingus.
okay. So hey, Bingus, how's it going? Hope you're out there watching. Because when we all jumped on you and you're talking about cloning, and he says it doesn't matter, right? About the sterilizing.
Cleanliness.
This is a general thing, and okay, it doesn't matter. You're right. It doesn't matter, especially on a small operation, right? And but it does, because if we were to say the temperature doesn't matter and the light doesn't matter, the amount of water in the medium doesn't matter, and how long you leave it out from putting it in the medium doesn't matter. At some point, one of these things becomes the least limiting factor, and it does matter, right? So so these things all matter, but you can fudge a little bit here and there on some of these things. And so if as long as you have all your IPM in place, right, and you have a clean garden, and you're just taking a few cuts, you don't need to sterilize, right? No, this is totally true, and I think, and that's where the variation it becomes from. It's like just saying it. And when you straighten that out, you're 100% correct, but the presentation is like can be confusing, I think. And so that's if I'm throwing an apology out there, that's all I'm doing right now, and explaining where we're coming from on this kind of stuff. That like when you said yes, totally, genetic drift is not something that occurs in a cloning situation. It's something that happens, for instance, in a wheat field where you have a million exactly identical grain coming up in there, and you have one that's got black alls instead of white alls. That's genetic drift, where there's this mutation that occurs in a huge population. And what people in cannabis industry call genetic drift is where they fuck up in their nurserymanship, and they somehow let down one of the factors or multiple factors. So if you let down on your IPM and you allow in insects that are disease vectors, and all of a sudden there's a virus in your plant that's changing the DNA, right? And then you've selected from what appears to be a vigorous plant, but it's got that virus in it, and you don't sterilize because you've now given, it doesn't matter on two factors, your IPA, or you loosened up, and then you've started transferring that to everything inadvertently, right? And then so through pores, whether they didn't feed properly, if they let that go down, all those things start to change the vigor of that sprout. And so it's a cumulative thing, and each one does not matter in and by itself, but when you add up a bunch of least limiting factors is when it starts to matter. And so that's, I think just kind of something to throw into this lesson. We have the same thing. We all want everybody to grow their own if they can, which should be free for everybody, right? And that's one of the reasons I put so much work into the breeding that I put into, to make stuff stress-free. No matter, even if I say pay attention to it like it's a fucking bag seed and you have no idea. I've had one person send me a picture of a herm in early flower and say, I think it was a light leaf though, and you told me to look for it, so I found it. That's how it's supposed to happen, right? Full disclosure, full honesty. That's what I'm all about when I'm trying to purvey information about what I'm doing, or getting the beginner to do it, because it can be extremely daunting and seem complex when you see the perfect yoga practitioner on Instagram in that perfect pose, right? But the reality is, no, I got yellow plants in my garden. Sometimes it's intentional.
I've got questions for you, Alex.
Oh yeah. No, stop. If I'm rambling off of past the end of the question, stop me for more, because I know. Please do that.
I like the complete answer. I will never cut anybody off for a short answer. Never. All right. So Johnny Kenneseed, he asked a while back ago, so I can't forget Johnny. I got a lot of tons of respect for Johnny. He wants to know, if you could suggest a good strain for desert conditions.
Man, you're
Nevada growing.
kind of chopped up. Suggesting a good strain for a Nevada grower? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Well, Nevada's a big state. Nevada means in Spanish snow covered, right? But we also know that it's also extremely desert state. So, I mean, are you in Elko town, or are you over in Reno, or are you in Vegas? Are you outdoor? There's a lot of.
It's a desert question. Definitely a
desert
question.
Zarian's got some great genetics from some desert areas he was talking about today. I'm not sure if he's got them released, but looking at Afghanistan, and that's one of the things we're talking about. It's extremely hot and dry. So is much of Pakistan, right? I've got genetics, but they're not. I don't have enough available right now. I have stuff from Tehran. Okay, extremely hot and dry. Desert regions, and so when you're one of the things that I don't like specifically giving people unless I get in like down into somebody, we're talking medicine and some of these ailments or whatever, and specific needs and what their response to chemistry is. I don't like really, just like with soils. I ain't gonna tell you this is what to do for your soil. I'd like to give you more information as how you can figure it out. And so if you start studying up on the land race a little bit and you look at a map using a Transmercator, is that the right one? I think it's the Transmercator map, but it's the one where the whole Earth is rectangulated and it's squared out for military use. So you can just basically draw a line and do a mathematical equation to say this is how many clicks. But what that does is it shows you the latitude where you're at, even if it distorts the shape of the landmass. It shows you the latitude, and that's one of the most important things: your latitude and your elevations, right? So if you're looking for a climate to match to yours, and you want to find a nice land race to use as a base in your breeding, or breeding something that's been produced already but doesn't do so well outdoors in your location, give it a dominant. You hit it with the male from that land race and see what happens with that stuff, right? So look at some of those more lowland desert regions of central and southern Afghanistan and Pakistan, and you're going to see some of that stuff. I know, like, people look at like, well, isn't Morocco desert like Africa and where they grow there? But they're growing at 12 to 14,000 feet in elevation, so it's a slightly different thing, right? You got to have some irrigation. But those things are those people we were discussing today, how in Afghanistan water is like the greatest struggle, and they're boring well over 1,000 feet, and Zarian speaks in meters, so maybe he was staying 3,000 feet to where the water is, right? So it's real expensive to bore down to even get irrigation water, and you might have money for the diesel to run the pump once a season. So these things are adapted to very little rainfall and one irrigation run, right? And that's kind of the same with this New Mexico land grant. That stuff has been adapted to the Southern Rockies, where you get a monsoon push, but they're basically growing in the bare desert soil without any without any irrigation. And I've bred with that. For instance, if you were to take my hardcore, and I give generally a 22 to 30, and it's a cc and a half vial. And I bred a couple of generations of that, and I threw it out to open pollination, and I collected the seed from the open pollination, or I'm sorry, the wild feral. I dispersed mountainside, right? Threw the seed out and let it do natural selection, not open pollination. Open pollination and natural selection. So basically, snow melt and thunderstorms is the only thing that fed these plants. And when you think about, and that's, so I used that New Mexico land grant, and I crossed it to, I took 6 or 7 clones up to 9,000 feet and planted them out in a couple of springs up there to see how they worked up at the high elevation. and I took that New Mexico land grant and hit the one that survived, which happened to be cookie wreck. And I know I mislabeled a whole bunch of these packs. It says train wreck on them. So sorry everyone if you get that. It's cookie wreck. The packages I put out like 100, maybe 200 packages. It says train wreck. Anyhow, that thing that survived and did great at high elevation. The moose was the only problem. The moose and the deer eat the crap out of that stuff up there, but it leaves the stems, and I can tell what happened. And then to that natural, localized, that's literally, it did great. Now here's a whole another crazy thought though. Here down in the valley last year where I'm at, I got maybe 2 inches of rain after ground thawed. We're in severe drought mode, right? And you can see I showed a video on my Instagram where I show this fungal mat in the soil underneath my compost pile. I also show how dry the sand is here. Last year, when the ground thawed, and this happens every year here, I get volunteers. It happened in the February full moon, basically. And I ended up having a population from my hemp breeding project that escaped my cultivation, basically. And the hemp, I allowed it, I pulled all the irrigation away from it, and I made sure I didn't get any water near it, and I let it go as a dry farm project because I've been talking with Navajo, some people representing Navajo and some other tribes about getting some hemp projects on these tribal lands, and how do we adapt something to their dry farming in the desert. And it's like, well, here, if it's going to grow in less than 2 inches of rain in my sand, it's going to grow anywhere, right? You know, and we had 100+ degree days and stuff, and et cetera. So there's kind of a matter, identify those ones that are more hardy like that. And again, if you want to contact me direct, I can work you through some of the stuff I've got. I can do consulting like this for folks. It's not anything I've really done in the past, but on a one-on-one thing, that becomes, something where it's more of a consulting deal, especially if you're in a profit tax situation. Can be there's different ways we can work through that, but helping people work through their personal medicine and stuff is really my key deal, and it's kind of actually like the sacred duty of mine. And I've been helping cancer patients since '85. I've never charged a dime to a cancer patient. A lot of times I'll just hook somebody up who explains their ailment to me, and it's not. Don't just expect it. You hit me up, but every once in a while, just like I've got the solution to you, and the only charge I have is pay it forward. You just share this with people you find who have this situation too, right? Heal them, be free. Is what people help me out, and I've learned that way, and it's amazing when the ripples that occur, the right, and that's with that board 13, and hopefully that gets passed around, and a different expectation comes from things, right? It's tops make great smoking, and the rest of it's an amazing hash plant, and it grows like crazy. But yeah, oh, you're on mute.
I like the sounds of the hash plant there because I definitely love hash. And, luckily, I got a gift of some beautiful hash as well today. I was
The
checking that
hackberry,
out. And what am I looking at? All I seen here was it says wet dream. That's
that's the older one. Okay, yeah. My first wife, under Australian common law, and I have after 20 years reconnoitered somewhat. We're become friends again. But one of the things I was trying to remember was where I first learned how to smoke a chillum, and she brought it with her from her journeys. Introduced me to chillum and some of my early hash smoking back then. But so I've been gifting her some hash, and she's really enjoying that wet cream. And that's aged a year and a half. Wet Dream, I think, was some of the first seed I acquired when I put my head out of this ground, and somebody was willing to send me some seed. And it was Blue Dream and Sex Bud. And yeah, so they called it Wet Dream. And big, so it is fairly like a Blue Dream with a heavy frosty indica leaner into it. I ran that for several years. People really enjoyed it. Quite flavorful. It's gone from my garden now. Great medicine, and again, yeah, Tracy rather enjoyed it. And your conversation with Duchess, you said you don't ever really get aged medicine. It's gone as fast as it gets to your pipe, and after you produce it and wash it out. And so I figured a little bit of aged candy, chocolate flavor, and then the other one is something that's a little fresher. That is some of it'd be a cousin to the Board 13. Is the Hostem Locket Miel, and the Spear of Milk and Honey. And that's some of my the premium. All these are the epiphany of my literally 20 years of working with the Dr. Dream All Cure, and then coming out of my hole in the ground 5 or 6 years ago and starting to acquire these landraces to breed it to and break it back out in all its glory. It has so much within it. It's the more I work with it, and I just like, wow, I was so blessed when this was the only freaking seed, the only plant to survive out of everything I had over all those years, and this one cut survived. It's Dr. Dream All Cure, and it's pretty amazing. So yeah, it's got potentials, and I'm breaking them out for y'all.
I can't wait. I need to clean me out a nice spoon so I can enjoy it just for the sample it is. You know what I mean? When you get something like that you rarely come across, you just don't throw that into a dirty piece. You know
Right,
what I mean?
right.
You clean that and appreciate that for the genuine gift that you've got there.
Yeah. No, pardon me. Frenchie talks about in his hash etiquette. Talk about the when you meet these people in the Shiraz zones or whatever, and they smoke a chillum, that they'll take your chillum for you and inspect it, and they'll make a determination as to who you are by the condition, the cleanliness you keep your chillum.
Really?
Whether, yeah, clean chillum, clean person type of thing, and like, but if you respect, because each offering you put into there is a whole nother interaction with the farmer, the charispi, the terroir, the earth it came from, and the time it matured over in the hands that passed it came to you as a gift in the chillum that's handed to you, right? All that stuff gets into, and I don't do a whole lot of chillum. I did break mine out today, talking with Azarian, and remembered how much I really enjoy them. I'm probably going to be making some out of some of the Utah pipestone, actually. And it occurred to me today that I should contact it. I got a good friend who's an amazing ceramic artist, and I should probably intrigue upon acquiring the proper clays for good chillum for smoking hash in. Smoking hashes is definitely its own thing. You don't necessarily want to dab it. I can't do it with tobacco. Some people, that's the only way they do it. That's my woman crazy. She's a tobacco smoker, and I can't. Back when we were together, I smoked tobacco still, but I just can't anymore.
So what about? I mean, for me, it's never tobacco, and know this. That fine specimens that I received today, I will not do this with. Like I said, they'll be in a nice clean pipe and enjoyed, for exactly what. But most times when I'm here smoking, this is my hash jar right here. To be honest with you, this was full, Alex, not so long ago, and I
Right,
just keep plugging away at some hash. I don't mind the oxidation color. It's
right.
still nice, and I can get a nice worm out of that. No worries. But yeah, I'll plug away at it. So I'll cut it in, either cut it or roll it into a worm, and I
Uh-huh.
use a roller. So I'll put a little bit of grass in there, perfectly center my worm. It's got to be spaced about a half inch from each end. You know what I
Right.
mean? You never
Yeah,
know
yeah.
which end you're gonna light, so you got to have. You don't want to roach it. You know what I mean? It's got to burn the roach. You want that sweet hash and a roach, and then you sprinkle some on top, and then that's the way I like them, man. I
Like,
even some of the best cannabis, I still prefer a nice little worm in there to this. Slow her down and give it a little bit more medicinal body effect on it.
yeah, yeah. I'll cap a bong hit. I'll put it in my pipe. But usually anymore, it's interesting is like thinking back to what we used to get when we were kids and the commercial stuff that used to come out of Afghanistan or wherever it was we were getting it from. And the more and more I learn watching the hash producers in Afghanistan with this wonderful tool we have, and learn more and seeing what people do with modern hash today, and comparing with what my dry, mostly I do dry sift, and it's all pretty neat. It's really like the guy I learned from learned it in the streets of Morocco at the market, right? And back in the 70s or late 70s, early 80s. And it's I'm using the same techniques today with modern bags. And I'm shaking the bag of the buds that I've crushed lightly, and all that stuff's coming out, and just like my and the way he pressed it and everything. But one thing I've learned is that creme de la creme, that super fine where you don't work the plant at all. You just kind of like break it off and drop it and pull it off the screen. And it's literally the virgin press, like of olive oil. The I don't know how else to describe that stuff, but it's like it takes the full on ice wash machine, freezer, dryer, all that, thousands and thousands of dollars of equipment to mass produce what I'm talking about in the super fine quantities of the high grade of the traditional dry sift stuff, where you might run it 3 times through your screen, and just each time just take the first 80%, and it keeps refining and refining. It's straight fucking full melt. Dry sift is just, I make these balls. You see, I show pictures on my Instagram where I make these temple balls, and the last one I did was mere 2 gram temple ball of dry sift, this pure creme de la creme virgin accumulated stuff, and I roll it out and I take pictures of it over 24 hours as it flattens itself out by, I call it full cold melt, and it's just like this high grade stuff the Duchess might show or Frenchie might show. Before we're getting pressed or whatever, it's just pure keef trichome rosin heads. Amazing, and you can almost dab that stuff. It leaves a little residue, but I've been hitting that on the e-nail, and it definitely does. You can't really hit like what I gave you in an e-nail. It's not gonna. It's got a little more. That stuff is a little more work dry sift, um, than some of that super high grade I'm talking about. That stuff again, the way I operate in super traditional, it's very small percentage of the whole deal, right?
It reminds me of like an old Afghani hash. That's what it reminds me of.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so that Spear of Milk and Honey, something I found too in some of my breeding and hash making is I really like some of these things I'm going to leave as open genetic, where there's more than one, there's multiple phenotypes that are really closely the same, but it's not all the chemovar and like your terpene profiles can vary, and leaving it like that, and then and having that available, as well as where I take my direction into a single true to seed. You plant 100 and you're going to get maybe two that are different. Okay, and like that's your F5 and beyond inbreeding. Okay, but something I've realized is these true Afghan hash and these Paki hashes in these true landrace production countries, they don't have a single plant type. There's a very diverse population of males and females that are creating their seed base every year, right? And so they have, each region is dominated by its in the terroir, the weather, the earth, the people, right? But in that gene pool, there's diversity that comes together to create these just amazing groupings of terpenes profile as one, right? And so, well, we're so into our single polyhybrid elite strain wash, single strain all at once, and we say this is my hash of this strain, right? I'm finding some of well, those can be really awesome if I have this mixed variety of and you might, people derogatory might call it a hot dog water, right? And you're talking in extractions. But when you're mixing these hashes together and then you let them sit and develop over a year or two, it really creates these amazing groupings. And a whole nother concept I had where these thoughts come to me is trying to back cross Dr. Dream into itself as a seed I can produce and sell and release so people can grow that from seed. And I'm starting to realize that it's so polydiverse. There's so many base genetics into it mixed up. So many double recessives expressing as it is. It might be impossible for me to recreate it into a seed form, no matter how many back cross levels I get. I can get, but as I produce, I'm getting like these ones that's like that's all these features of it, and this is all these features of it, and this is all these features of it. They're separated, and a lot of these features are chemotype that comes together in the Dr. Dream molecule. And but when I walk past the group of them, I have that nose in total, if that makes sense, right? And so it's like, well, I can't reproduce that as a single plant. I'm getting the entire chemistry going on in mass between the group of them. And so I started realizing it's like, well, if I leave these hash strains that I'm producing different Afghanistani hash hybrids that aren't the regions, but I'm crossing those regions together, they're neighbors, and I want to select, it's like, these were never originally selected for flower. Somebody could breed a flower for smoking flower out of it, but these are hash plants. And so why should I select a single and change it from what it was when my intention is to preserve, maybe change and recreate a little bit, but offer this base genetic for other people to create from. And so someone can take those and say, this has the odor, this has the nose, this has the structure, and I can use that in my breeding project now. And or keep that group of genetics to produce a very unique hash variety, right? So there's so much to all of this. Yeah, yeah, that's how you get a unique hash, though. Is like you mix a whole bunch of unique original hash plants together.
I'm guilty of doing just that myself. Very, very rarely do I separate my trim. You know what I mean? I put all because it's not the way I run here. For one, you know what I mean? I might do quads and have 4 or 5 plants of each one at one time. You know what I
Right?
mean? But I run so many strains and it's constant flip. I could do that, but I don't. Unless it's really fire and I know it's something that's super unique, I might, well, fucking put it aside here and there and here and there and let it build up in the
But that's,
freezer.
you got to build up enough to make your
Really?
hash brown though, right? And so yeah, everyone's got a different process, everyone's got a different situation, right? And it's we don't all have pounds of flour to run through an ice machine. That's not, this guy's in Afghanistan, they literally have hundreds of acres of fields that are getting brought into a single hash house. And there's like an old bed frame stretched with the screen, and they're pitchforking this shit in and shoveling it with grain shovels, right? It's a whole different level of reality than a lot of us are as a home provider or even as a licensed and taxed operator might have.
I prefer to flip them, like you said, get that whole, wide spectrum of taste. You know what I mean? As it ages a little bit of this. Not that it ages around here, but it could. I like the fact there is definitely times where I pull out, different pieces, and I'm definitely pulling out, different terps out of this run or that run, and you know what I mean? Because it's
Right.
mixed in a little different, but yeah, I prefer it like that. I could do the single strain, but unless it's just something magical single strain, I'm mixing it, and I don't mind the mix.
Yeah. No, it's like I was just saying, and to me, it becomes a much more rich bouquet. When I'm making FICO, the raw hash oil extraction, black hash oil extractions that I make for cancer patients or for arthritis or for topicals or whatever, I throw as many strain as I have possible into that, right? And get as diverse of a full spectrum of everything I possibly can into that medicine. And this is someplace where, most of us think chlorophyll in medicine is bad. We definitely, for combustion it's not the best thing. We don't want plant matter in, smoking a whole flower is a totally different thing than smoking an extract, and it's a whole different thing than vaping it, right? We all understand that when as someone who consumes, and sometimes not necessarily the easiest thing to get a lawmaker to understand that. But we all have the different chemistries and different responses and stuff, right? Brain fart. I was going somewhere with that. Anyhow, first brain fart of the night. I'm doing good.
There's no worries in that. No, everybody has them. Everybody.
Yeah.
I have them too often, to be honest with you.
No, but if you try and remember what it was, it makes it worse. So it's like sometimes there's help from the chat. I can't see chat, so
no, they've been enjoying this, and speaking of chat, since we still have questions.
Oh yeah, please.
Unanswered.
Please, yeah, I'm happy to answer questions. It's better. I like answering questions better than just rambling. Because then I'm rambling with a purpose.
Let me see here. I'll flip back here. It's been a minute. It's been a minute. We've had a good conversation. One of them was your thoughts on Afghani strains, which we've kind of touched on somewhat. Yeah. So I guess you could start there.
There's a lot of about Afghani strains. They're so diverse. There's so many of them. It's like we'll say, "Ooh, I got Afghanica. I got Afghan Kush." And when you start looking at that as a landrace enthusiast, you start realizing it's like, well, there's Mazar Sharif, there's Hindu Kush, and then Hindu Kush, there's several diverse variations, right? You get into all these different districts, and each district has a village or a production zone, and or an area that's associated with that name place. And so there's great diversity in what is Afghan Kush or Afghan genetics, right? And so we have pre-Soviet is one way we can delineate. So that stuff that is before the Soviet invasion, and they did some eradication and kind of things kind of got shoved underground a little bit. There's a lot of conjecture that the genetics weren't upkept. There is science that shows that when things are not tended by man, they revert to wild, right? So, but a lot of that stuff was kept in the shoebox over years or whatnot, and also whatever might come in there eventually adjusts to the terroir of that locality. So yeah, I've got maybe a dozen or so different Afghan variants in my vault. But there's definitely quite a few more than that. You'll see quite a few people just label something back in the day would just be labeled as a Hindu Kush, and that's a part of Afghanistan. And so a lot of things, like all the rivers flow downstream from the Hindu Kush region, and so you literally all these hash region, a lot of people just like conglomerated all this stuff all originated from Hindu Kush, so it's Hindu Kush, right? But there's definitely diversity because these are all secluded areas. There's no water in between for plants to grow, and so while it may be dry and windy, that stuff might, but it's also hot. There's different conditions that can act with how wild interaction to those landrace populations are and how refined and cultivated they get. So that's a huge conversation in itself, just in Afghanistan. And I have one genetic that acquired that came from 2006 in the Barkal region, and it came off of a Humvee of a Marsoc Raider after a firefight. Okay, and this one came with some heavy baggage for me. It came with a lot of karma that I had to clean out of it, and it's an amazing plant that produces just some of the most oily extracts that they never solidify. And if you do a hydrocarbon extraction, it stays as a straight oil, right? It's so oily it will not shatter, no matter how long you put it in an oven and vac it. Straight black, purple, actually blue hues on this plant. It's literally a blue Kush. But I asked the guy who sent it to me. His son and daughter are both Marsoc Raiders in the Marine Corps, and I was trying to figure out as I'm watching it grow. It was a little unusual from anything I was trying to conjecture. Had this been fed fertilizers? What kind of soil was it grown in? And I asked him these questions, and the response was like, "Well, I'm sure my son would have liked to ask the guys that were growing it, but he had to kill them all. War is hell." Right? And so there's literally a lot of different things going on in Afghanistan that dictate what genetics come to us, how, when, and what they were being produced for. You know, I have no idea if that was a family farm and it was a mistake of intelligence and they killed a bunch of innocent farmers, or if it was some bad guys that were producing drug money to fund their insurgency, right? I have no way of knowing that stuff. I know it came to me, and there I had to deal with that karma, and I've cleansed it. I'm still working to put that into a form that I could release. I've tried a couple of hybrids of it. Its intersex is kind of bad. It's typical of most landrace though. And it's got to get worked by a couple of several generations by somebody to adapt it to cultivation and our concepts of environment. And like this thing, I don't think it would ever make a decent smoking flower bud. And that's something that's like, how much do I want to put into that? Because that's the majority of our market so far. But people are starting to lean towards hash plants just for hash plants now, where they grow up purely for extraction. So I'm leaning towards releasing some of that stuff for people to work with. with all understanding that, like, some of these might not be as stable as we'd like or whatnot. You're not going to get buds off of these unless you totally lollipop them. Yeah, Afghan, again, that's a huge discussion just in that country's genetic loan, and whether or not it's an entirely different subspecies of cannabis. Even Afghanica is a whole question in and of itself that some people say has been settled genetic analysis. Yes, there's 3. That's one of them. totally unique region there where it developed in that desert and the terroir and such. I think Arzarian was talking about how those harsh environments, the plant, I want to say he said cutican, but I'm not exactly sure. Literally, the plant's physical chemical structure is different from the elevation, the solar radiation, the heat, right? And the lack of water, all that stuff. It changes the entire structure of the plant to different stuff. Which reminds me, so going back, I was talking about where I brain farted was making FICO, raw extract of cannabis oil, right? And we were talking about chlorophyll, anthocyanins, and this is the purples and the blues that we see in plants, right? And those kick in to warm the plant at high elevation when it's cold. Okay, and that's part of that strategy, and it stops turning green. But both of those, the chlorophyll and the anthocyanin, are anti-inflammatories for us. They're like superfoods. They're full on. Chlorophyll is one molecule different from our red blood cells, right? It's like literally it's like the pulse of life. Okay, so we can ingest that stuff in its whole raw form, even if it's been extracted and kept in a plasma form, right? In the, like, if I got raw hash oil in a freezer for 6 months, that stuff's still good. It still acts in our body. Our body still reacts. It goes through and pulls out free reactives and stuff, and free radicals, and they're superfoods. So when we ingest those, along with the cannabinoids and the full spectrum of mixing the plants together to get everything possible that a plant, because one plant ain't going to produce them all. Even something like Dr. Dream produces a whole lot of the spectrum. We can't get it all into one plant. So you mix those all together, you get that full medicine in the raw form, above and beyond. I like to keep that stuff in there for so many reasons. Yeah, Afghanica purple reminded me of that. So brain fart complete.
I'm sure you feel better now that you've completed
Finish that thought there. Well, that's the thing. You don't lose the thought. It just goes someplace else for a minute, and then you come back to it.
So I can't help but notice you have not smoked along tonight. You have a chillum in your hand. There you go. He's one step ahead of me. One step ahead of me.
I've had the microphone all night. Didn't light it. Yeah. No, I've been part of it is I took one extra too many GMO hits before sitting down. And literally almost damaged myself with that second hit. And like, man, sometimes some of these things you don't need a second hit of. And so GMO cookies is definitely in my kind of like your hash. There it is. I'm smoking it.
Red pill. Finally, his question was so far back I couldn't scroll back to get it. He said again. He did. He finally threw it back up there. He wants to know if you've seen a Vietnamese times Oaxacan cross. Oaxacan is Wuhan Khan. Oh, you know how bad my pronunciation is, right? Oaxacan. Red pill. Come on.
Oaxacan. I love the spelling of Oaxacan. I've grown Oaxacan corn, but I have not grown I know these crosses exist. I've not grown that, but I've definitely seen people offering such things. landrace enthusiasts are really enthusiastic about making F1 crosses of their landraces. But something like that would be an excellent base to cross to an Afghan of sorts to create a old school skunk. And that's kind of like the breeding pathway the old skunks originated from. The Sam the Skunk Man bred from, and some of the other before him. There's every generation there was somebody before that was doing a skunk production of sorts. And but that's it. Is those tropical sativa to a Mexican by an Afghan. And that was like the original formula I had in my head when I was 15 years old, once upon a time ago. But yeah.
Captain 420 would like to know if you have anything that he can grow in Thailand.
Man, I bet I got all sorts of stuff you could grow in Thailand, especially if you're growing indoors. But one thing I really don't do specifically is I have a hard time because I don't have a tropical location to breed for or in to simulate the situations you have. And so I can take something from like what I've acquired from India that's from a more of a tropical zone and suggest something like that. But all of us in Western culture are like, man, you got Highland and Lowland Thai. Well, we can't get Thai stick no more, and we don't get our chocolate Thai anymore. And why don't you grow that? But of course, that's what you're used to and are over it. So I know there's people there locally who are working on refining some of the landrace, preserving it, and making it to where it doesn't hermaphrodite as bad as some. But that's one of so you're going to be looking for, if you want to find something that would work there, is something that's been bred and produced either in or for tropical zones, right? And again, that's just not. I live in the desert, and at the best I can test against humid conditions in my greenhouse, but it's far from the tropical reality. I kind of can get to Mediterranean at best. And in the Mediterranean you can kind of grow a tropical thing, but yeah, so I just it's just too dry here. I can't simulate the moisture patterns and things like that are in those zones. And again, that's you get into looking at what Azarian and I are talking about, and you can match up from other localities, things you could bring in or understand the base genetics or these polyhybrids to see where they're originated from in the landscape in climate. That word has been escaping me all fucking night. Climate, yeah. So the local climate and match it up to what you got. Again, with a lot of the Afghanistan stuff that's been originated in the dry zones, they are horrible for bud rot, for instance. And the reason tropical plants grow so elongated and open and airy buds is because that moisture needs to move through and not allow rot to happen. So that's an adaptation that occurs. And we were talking part of our conversation about landrace, and when you move them out of where they're from, the length of day is the hardest thing to change. And so they're in the tropics. Plants adopt to that. So if you're able to lengthen days for a while, you can grow polyhybrids and then just let them go to the natural, whether you got 11 to 13 hours throughout, how far you are from the equator dictates that natural light cycle. So if you can grow stuff indoors and just move it outdoors, boom, it goes right into flowering, right? But you want to still find something that was bred leaning towards that tropical origin that has more bud rot resistance, kind of smaller or more open flower. You move an indica from Afghans or an indica leaning hybrid into a tropical zone, and it tends to grow a slightly narrower leaf, and the stem nodes elongate to accommodate the light, the spectrum, the humidity. It might not have a longer flower period. So you can look at breeding some of that in those shorter flower periods in with various plants that are adapted to that tropical. Some of the stuff that Azarian talks about is how the monsoons hit the Himalayas, and then and the moisture regimes at the different elevations there, and how you can get a shorter day with the that kind of same tropical environment from going and finding something from a higher elevation and then bringing it into your lower elevation, right? And so there's lots of ways of going about and solving that equation, to changing up what you have available to you from just the local land race and wild population there in your locality.
So, Sister Golden here would like to know if you've ever dealt with introducing a poly,
Poly,
I'll let you try before I get tongue tied in bed.
polyhybrid.
Polyploidism.
Oh, so I'm going to refer to there's more I've forgotten about this plant than most people ever learn. Polyploidism was something that I remember discussing extensively when I was at Cal Poly, and we were having all sorts of weird mutations in local citrus plants that we started discussing. Was this part of the extension program experimentation and putting these polyploid produced plants out in the public to see what would happen? How's that for an onomatopoeia? So basically the concept is you're spraying a chemical onto your seed or plant to try and get it to chemically mutate, right? And changing its sexual reproduction system, and changing how many gametes you've got. If I'm pulling this out of my ass correctly, right? So polyploid, right? You've got the sexual gametes has been increased. There's so many chromosomes, and you usually get half and half, and then so the polyploid you're like quadding them or something, whatever that is. No, it's something I've done, and what I understand was they didn't find a whole lot of success in getting. You might get a generation or two of some sort of interesting results that might accentuate one or two aspects of a particular cultivar, is what I recall about polyploidism applied to breeding in cannabis. So it's something that has been tried in the past and did not really find much promise, and it really doesn't really. Yeah, the plant's so diverse. There's no need to, once we understand all the options that are there to start with, right? My memory is it was really frowned upon across the agricultural students community when we started thinking that we might have been subjected as a community, that these polyploided plants were put out as an experiment. And that's why all of a sudden, like, we're all getting really bizarre lemons and oranges and shit in our yards. Whether that was under the truth or not, we don't know. But we didn't know anywhere near as much as we did about how things transfer. This was 35 years ago, 30 years ago, early 90s in Cal Poly, when we were having that discussion about bizarre mutated lemons that would have like 3 lobes on them.
That's why I'm almost bummed to hear that, because I'm glad that Sister Golden here asked, but I'm a little bummed by the answer, because I popped shit tons of beans here, and I mean shit tons of beans, and it was just recently where I'm standing over here and I'm sexing some of my plants, and I look, and I've got a triploid, a male, and his tops are all triploid all the way up and down. And then so a lot of people were saying, well, wait to see if the lower branches are exhibiting the traits too, because it was weird. Just as I'm looking them over, before I really noticed the triploid, I'm thinking there's something special about this plant. So and even then, I held on to it, and even as the lowers are coming up, the lower branches, as they top off, they're topping off in threes.
Uh-huh.
And so I've I've still
So
got him around. I've still got him around. I haven't tossed him out
yeah,
yet,
yeah, no,
but I
they
definitely thought about keeping him and breeding him.
they're fun to play with, and it's fun to see if you can get to reproduce, right? I've run out multiple generations, and actually, so my entire genetic offerings that I consider or call my economy line, they're all pollinated by what I call the trident of Saint Bernard, and he met all of my criteria through my protocols for selection, and just happened to be trifoliate, and that's the proper term for it, is a trifoliate. And so and it has to do with bifoliate, where they're across, and but you have world where they spin around, and that's a trifoliate. So it's a common mutation, and it's kind of neat. And as a single plant, it has great adaptation. If it was in a dense population, it would probably get selected against. But if it got a seed dropped out by itself and growing without a whole bunch of neighbors, that's going to expand its capacity to produce, right? And so you've got 3 times as much from a single stem. What's really neat, there's a couple of things in breeding to see how if you can back cross with it and get it to reproduce in a couple of generations. The other thing that's interesting to see is if you clone it, and if it continues through clone generations, right? And but besides that, it's just a really neat mutation, I think, is what all the discussions have come around to. And yeah, they're pretty cool. And I ended up with a really awesome name for a whole line, with call it the Trident, because of this, yeah, the same kind of stuff. They're definitely you're one in 3,000. You're gonna find that, maybe. Um, yeah, maybe, I've had it come up where one summer I have 3 of them, but you also might go 20 years and never see one, right? It's those are pretty neat, but there's also, but that's not a triploid, okay?
Yeah.
That's a genetic misnomer there, and that's a often misused word applied to that. It's quite common to think that, and just like everything else, there's so much information, and again, I might be pulling this out and be completely wrong. How it's like that one. It's not something I've dealt with a lot. I just remember it's like a chemical process to try and create a whole different set of genetic information in the offspring, right? And so that's what it looks like when you have that trifoliate. It's like, oh wow, did I have an extra bit of genetics going on here, or it's just a cool, it's a cool semi-common mutation, kind of like getting variegation, right? When you start getting a leaf that has yellow stripes on it or something, that's always fun and interesting, and doesn't necessarily affect what the plant is. It's quite often associated with something that's chronic, like when you get little flowers coming off the stem.
So why do we associate, the variation with chronic?
Usually it has to do with inbreeding and protein production loss. And so you think about inbreeding in humans, and you end up having like a blood disease or whatever, like in the royal lines or whatever, right? So it's something kind of similar like that, where you've inbred so far to where there's part of an RNA process that's literally lost, and you're not producing a protein or an enzyme in the system. But that comes from inbreeding to select for the double recessive stack that produces that elite genetic, right? So double recessives, when they come forward and express, it means you've had to breed out a bunch of dominant stuff. So you have a whole bunch of inbreeding going on to make this occur, right? And so whenever you select for one thing against other things, you're losing something, you're losing some information away from the main original group of information that the genetic has. And you're trying to force something that's into a position where certain keys come together, throws a door open, this information runs away and hides, and this all says, ah, right? And it like taking, and it's weird because I some of the craziest, most amazing expression I've had of vigor and dominance came from taking tweezing pollen out of the scraggliest mutated wimpy little does not want to produce a fucking flower male you can imagine. But that's where I got the purple mutant Chitral Stardust line from. And the name itself is like, what? But it was a mutant purple Chitral Kush from Pakistan. And again, it was like, I'm going to see, Mentor says that the runts quite often are the best medicine, and don't ever call until you exhale. I think is one that I passed on from him and quite often state. So I took that experiment to the fullest, and the return from it was like, wow, that's so that had been inbred so many generations. It was the landrace that had been selected as a cultivar by a seed company. The dude bought it and inbred it for 6 generations, and I got it, and it was on my 2nd generation of inbreeding it. So it was so inbred from that original cultivator that it was, but as soon as it hybridizes and it gets that vigor and it releases, and it's just like, whoa. Yeah, the things we don't know.
I definitely agreed a little bit about that mutant. And I always let that always let that little guy go, little gal go, to see what she's got. Let her catch up. It's usually just that first round too, where they get along. You know what I mean? Second
Yep,
round,
yep,
third round, they tend to perk back up and catch up with everything else.
yep,
So
yep.
you're right. It's worth that time to see if you've got that gem there.
Yeah, no, if
Most
you're
often than not, you're right.
just growing from seed every time for personal use, it might not be in your best interest to do that, right? That Pakistani line has produced some males that are big, robust, and frostier than most female lines of high grade weed. But it doesn't produce any pollen out of these things. And people get sold on that, and a bunch of breeders like, man, they saw one of the kids that got a bunch of seed to select, and he saw these males, and they're like, and he sent out a whole bunch of seed to all these other breeders, and they grew it out, and they found these runts growing and stuff. And they threw the whole project out because I don't need that in my system. But that same line, I kept working myself, and I'm producing. If you look at my IG, you can see my what I'm calling Zakistani Kush now. And if you don't know what Zakistan is, it's you Google it and you'll find it's this little country that resides in the West Desert of Utah. And it's an art project, but it's this real country you can get a passport to, and it has diplomats and stuff. But it's this really weird existence. But I started realizing at some point this is no longer Pakistani Chitral Kush. I've inbred it to this very specific purple, actually fuchsia flame genetic with this insane sour apple, rotten eggs and grapes kind of thing to it. But it's definitely not, Pakistani Chitral Kush has 40% purples of all sorts of diverse form and 60% green that tend to be dominant is these stark colas with big old buds and put you to sleep PTSD medicine. So yeah, at some point it's no longer Pakistani Chitral Kush landrace. It's this IBL, right? and I found the proper path of inbreeding that actually produces this big solid purple flower with orange flames while it's growing, and tops of the leaves are green, the bottoms are all red and fuchsia colored. You know, it's a beauty. Can't wait to get that one out for folks to play with. It's probably June. I'll have that being released. Is Zakistani Kush is both regular and hopefully soon after that is feminized.
Sounds amazing. Sounds amazing. We do have some more questions here in chat. Ask about LA Master Kush.
LA Master Kush. Like some old legendary strain or something that's around now, or so Master Kush back in the Super Sativa seed catalog would have been my understanding. Master Kush was
LA Master Kush, if it helps narrow it down.
Yeah, so I really don't know any. It would have been somebody like if anyone see the big discussion about what cat piss is, and the fellow from San Diego that grew what was originally dubbed cat piss in the late 80s and early 90s, the stuff my brother originated with, we only had so much selection and availability of seeds back in the day, and Master Kush was one of them. And so it was a semi-refined cultivar of Hindu Kush. And then which village or region, I'm not sure that originated at, but somebody went there and they selected, I think it passed through a couple of hands and before it got started getting produced into the seed bank. And it was basically maybe a third hand or fourth hand selection out of Hindu Kush through a couple of these old school seed guys. And he presented what he called Master Kush, and it came out through the seed catalog. And that became the base of a lot of strains that were the super weed that we had about 1990 in the Hindu Kush leaning side of stuff. A lot of the super skunky, super reeky, one hit and quit, bong hit style. It was getting grown in the two-part back in the day. That's what that Master Kush produced. A lot of these strains that disappeared because they were just too fucking loud. You couldn't grow 1,000 watts because it stank the whole fucking neighborhood. We didn't have charcoal. We didn't understand UV exhaust. Now you can sterilize the air in different ways, and they were kicking your door in for electric bill of 2,000 watts, and so you had to have these multiple houses, and even the clones were so fucking stinky. The mothership house, you just have one house that would produce a shit ton of clones and pass them out to the grow house, right? And keep it all separate, whatever. And so some of those were just, you hear some of the stories, and I know the one that my brother had original was like this, where the clone itself, it stank like a dead fucking skunk was somewhere under the basement or something when you got near the house. You run 3,000 watts and the whole fucking neighborhood's calling animal control looking for the mystery skunk family that no one's ever seen but everyone smells, right? That's kind of how it was around here until I got charcoal proper. But even with charcoal, I'd still have that phenomena going on. Blocks away, and you're smelling skunks, right? They're like, what the fuck? It's like you can't trace it back to a house because it's like the whole freaking neighborhood was just reeking. And yeah, those are the real skunky skunks. So just Master Kush in general. So somebody in LA got a cut of that they found out of a pack of seeds, and it started getting produced around in LA. And that's my conjecture. I don't know that for certain, but to the best of my knowledge, that's probably what we're talking about, is something along those lines.
Alex Boykachev would like to know if I could ask you about your India trips. Did you try any of the Awis strains, and did you swim in the Gang River?
So I've never actually been to India, and I have friends through the shrinking of the world through internet. I have several friends, and Azarian in particular is the person who's developed some of this. I would like to. I haven't gone green rushing or anything particularly in my daughter. I've been here. I was getting ready to actually seriously. I was about to join a monastery and or move to Alaska, and my daughter came along, and so she's 16 and a half now, and we're both very much aware that when she's done with high school and 18 years old, I'm the fucking out of Utah. She might come with me, but one of the places I'd like to go is, if when I can afford it, is to go spend some time there in India and travel around and see these holy lands of hash, and see if I can't wear my gray beard and my funky turban and make it into some of these places in Afghanistan that they don't necessarily like your common American. But I got some guys recently following me, and one of the things I just love, the guy comes through and gives me all this love, and I look at his page and it's like, I can't read Arabic, damn it. And so yeah, that's something I've been thinking about for a couple of years. Is I need to start learning more than say habla español, and get ready to travel. That's coming. The world's opening up. Freedom is coming for the whole globe, slowly but surely. Right. The foreign countries I've been arrested in for my personal medicine will no longer arrest me for my personal medicine. Right. Only my own home country, under a mistake of color of law, would I be put in the jail still. But that, yeah, no, thanks for asking. That's something I'd like to put out there, that I was saying it earlier. No matter what I say, and it's like we all have a different perspective, and you might misunderstand something that I said. Is someone else was calling me out one day saying like, well, would you talk about being at the UC system? Where's your thesis? And like, well, no, I went to Cal Poly. That's not in the UC system, and I did science. We might call it a bachelor's thesis at this point, but back in the day, it was a senior project, right? So all of our perspectives are all different. We all have different experiences in life, and so we might interpret what someone says a little bit differently, just from our own experiences and or where we came into the conversation. Yeah, since I met Azarian 5 or 6 years ago, I've learned so much more about India. When we study landrace, we learn geography, we learn culture, but not just through those studies. I like to study physics, metaphysics, and these kind of things. And understanding the ancient temples of India, you start to understand a whole bunch more about their culture and the embodiment of Shiva and the plant of the green goddess, cannabis herself, and their culture of consuming bhang or going to Shanti, visiting Shanti, and communing with Shiva, right? And there's definitely different subcultures there in India. It's a huge place with a lot of different people, and yeah, no, and of course wearing the Sikh people actually wear a turban and as part of when I understand they're the originated devotee of Shiva, but if you look at their tenets of understanding the cosmology of our place in the universe and the higher power, and you start reading their how they operate in the universe, and see how it is. I found that to be actually a lot more in line with, like, I've almost been a Catholic priest in a couple of different sects of Catholicism, right? Jesuit and Benedictine, and but when I read up about Sikhism, I'm like, wow, that really aligns a whole lot more with my understanding of what is and who I am and where I am in this reality. And but yeah, it's a big world, and egocentrism of a Christian might call these other cultures witchcraft or mythology or something. But then if you look at Christianity under the lens of, it's ritualized cannibalism and witchcraft from a whole different standpoint, when you stand back and look at what's going on in any of the different Christian sects, all of the religions have something called the golden rule: do unto others as you would have done unto yourself, right? And that's the one thread. And I definitely have studied quite a few different religions from different points of view and stuff. And that's kind of like why I teach. It's why I preserve. It's why I grow organic. Right? Is a lot of people don't realize that like everything we do affects everyone else around us. I move this air here and it changes everything. There's a chain reaction. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Every thought you have has this happening, right? There's energy moving. And we are all just energy. So that stuff, if you can't escape it, we might not see it, but it's all very real.
The connection is real, very much so. From one thing to another, it is so true. People just don't realize, that connection. How what they say and do, how it impacts others. Not just now, along the lines, in time. It may not be instantaneous, but it does sure should have an impact at some point.
Yeah, yeah. We may never know. You may never know. Here's a great story that'll relate this to y'all. So my passion was this fire when I was younger and healthy and stuff, was doing this firefighting stuff, and the entire seeing all of nature in its greatest glory is releasing hundreds of years of sunlight energy in an instant, right? And like, it's pretty fucking impressive, right? A volcano, for instance, is pretty damn impressive. I've never been up and close and personal to a volcano, but we can all see it. Like, that's belittling, right? Walking amongst a wildfire and a crown fire is it puts you, makes you feel pretty small, right? Because you can instantly burn to crisp. And I've walked out of places that no human being should have ever survived. Second brain fart. I was going to tell a great story. Yeah, it'll come to me later because that's how it works. I tangents a little too far. I think you're muted. You're muted, buddy.
This last thing you said there was that you survived things that normal people shouldn't have survived. And you were referring to firefighting.
Yeah. No, I tangented. It was before that was where I was going. I tangented off. Seeing everything in its glory, the energy, the understanding. Yeah, sorry everyone. Brain farted. It is. I do normally, like I was saying, this is my double header, first time ever, and I do normally, I'm asleep at night when we start the show. So I'm getting to that fade zone a little bit. Pardon me. I had a great story to tell. It'll come out at some point. Yeah.
We'll hang in there. It'll come back.
We got you. I was about to say, before I start the story, you got any more questions? I'm like, if I ask that, I'll never remember the story. And then I went tangent and forgot the story anyhow.
Sometimes it might just come back. So
Yeah.
In your opinion, how long does it take to stabilize a land rice or preserve it? And when you say preserve, do you mean something that it's in a state where You could look across the field and it would almost look like a cornfield. You know what I mean? Same height,
They
same
don't.
height, same
Let's
traits, or
yeah.
nothing. Or
Let's
would it
clarify
be a
this.
lot of variation?
Let's clarify this. So a preservation run is taking as much genetic material you've got and continuing it, right? So it might be a lot of times people only have a couple of these landrace seeds, and you take that and you do an expansion, right? You open up, you get two males and a female, and you do that's an open pollination with more than one male, okay? And preferably you have more than one female. But so a preservation run is preserving the genetic as it came to you, okay? Stabilizing it is a whole other term and set of actions. And a stabilization project is you're either stabilizing for certain traits or stability against hermaphrodization. So stabilized strain is going to be a little more true in its seed production repetition. And it's going to be a lot less prone to hermaphrodization. Okay, and a preservation is going to be extremely diverse. It's going to have all of the idiosyncrasies that came with that seed as it was selected from the field in either in a cultivated, semi-wild, or wild situation, right? And again, some people do not agree that wild is landrace. I'm not going to dictate to anyone that says they have to agree with me on that. You can see everything I talk about this. It's a huge conversation in itself. So stabilizing against hermaphrodization and an old school technique of what we call heirloom breeding, where we select by traits and observation. It can be approximately 5 generations of breeding to breed away from having a dominant presence of intersex without stress causing it to happen. It can be considerably more than that to get away from all stressors kicking in. With modern breeding techniques in the laboratory, you can bring that down to 2 or 3 generations using genetic markers and selection that way, is my understanding. And we might even be able to get it to go out to the field, select thousands and run them through and find this is the one that has, it's been stable, you know, it's got that genetic marker for disease resistance. It's missing all of the markers that say it's going to hermaphrodite, right? And then you can walk away to the field. That's in the future. We don't have that technology just yet. So, yeah, there's a, and then anytime you cross that, once it's stabilized, it's going to have those double recessives or other things that have come back to dominant, right? Because it's recombined the genetic with something new. It could take a whole another 5 generations to stabilize that out again.
So if I gave 1,000 seeds, say, to a farmer on the West Coast and 1,000 seeds to a farmer on the West Coast, and they both did same, outdoor land preservation, land race preservation projects, excuse me. In the end, do you think they would come out with a similar stock?
No.
Because they were worked in 2 different areas?
2 different areas.
Same strain.
Totally different climates, totally different terroir, totally different farmer, right? You can take a mother and a father that have been inbred 10 generations, so they're producing true seed, and you hybridize those, right? And you're gonna have classic Punnett squares after that, where you're gonna have basically 4 different. You have your dominant and your subdominant, and you get the perfect bell-shaped curve distribution of how those 2 very precise populations have mixed. And you take 100 seeds of those and you send them to however many people, or even if it's 10 seeds of those, right? There's going to be a slightly different variation and distribution in those 10 seeds or 100 seeds to start with. right? You need to get up to that 1,000 to get, or more, actually 3,000 is where you start getting into actual numbers of where you're statistically, a minimum of 30 is a sample. Okay. So if you got less than 30, you don't even have a base statistic of what's possible. At 300, you're starting to get above anywhere between 30 and 300, you're kind of in the same zone. And if you go 300 to 3,000, right, that's your next level of, you might find these further outliers off that J-shaped curve of distribution, right? And you might have 2 standard deviations from center. This is statistics. This is mathematically speaking about how that genetic distributed in variation, okay? And so the more of those you have, the more possibility of greater distribution and change, right? And so, but the possibility of any one person getting that great distribution of change is slim. And that possibility doesn't really feed into so much as how the epigenetics do in those different places and the person's personal preferences. Okay. So I have a very specific personal preference as to how I like to see a plant grow. And I literally will select flowers against that over other protocols that I know might necessarily be fudging the process, but it's like, I just don't like the way that fucking flower looks. It looks lame, right? And that's something it's really hard to get away from in breeding and whatnot. So in preservation, you got to come up with ways, how do you get around that, right? You have to take that objectivity out of the situation completely if you can in a proper preservation, and or understand that it's like, okay, so I've open pollinated it, but it's no longer at some point going to be that land race anymore because I selected certain things that it becomes a cultivar of that land race, right?
So at that point, does is it technically East Coast X and West Coast X, or are they,
Yeah, that's kind of it.
completely different strains selected by
There's
nature?
there's that nature, there's that preference of the person, there's also the preference of the culture around that person, that like they got a financial responsibility to themselves to be successful. And so if it's just snakes and sparklers that they like, right? And it's like, okay, well, I ain't gonna even go anywhere if no one else likes snakes and sparklers, right? And so there's not even gonna be a successful program if it doesn't turn out to be something that it's kind of weird. Like, I got this wild selected, there's probably a feral Sheila Bawathi from India, and I grew it, and it is, by Western standards, it was all foxtails, 100% foxtails, and by a grower standards and a breeder standards, you're like, what the fuck is that shit, right? But by my patient standards, I would sample it out to people, and everybody asked for that medicine. When they come around for medicine, that was the one, and it the ugliest motherfucking shit you'd ever look at. And it was almost a little bit harsh to smoke on, but the effect was proper on so many levels for how it helped people with whether arthritis or whatever it was. Zero couch lock, super uplifting, got your brain going, got you thinking. It's got that THCV in there, right? It's kind of interesting how we've been conditioned to that dense nugget that fits in, that has that bag appeal because of the black market over all those years, that you wanted to have something that would actually, you could tell by a quick look and a quick sniff, that's going to do the job, right? But we all know it's like, if you didn't have your common regular fix and you had somebody else's medicine, your chemistry was off, and you couldn't do your deal if you were relying on somebody else's back in the day when it came around, and you're at the whim of. It's kind of a trip when it's weird, and I think back when I talk about this stuff and tell people you should have 3 genetics to get you through your day proper, right? If you have true, and I have very real medicinal issues, medical issues. My spine, I'm missing a lot of my spine, right? And I'm missing other parts of my body. And I went through a lot of part of my life not knowing I'd broken my neck twice, okay, and dealing with pain no human being should deal with. And so once I figured out, I set my chemistry where I can deal with the day. And if I didn't have that chemistry in place, it really messed me up, right? So I think about, like, I tell people to have the 3 strains, but then also I think back to DARE class when it was like, at first you feel good, but eventually you depend on it and you have to have it to be normal. And it's like, well, damn, I'd much rather be puffing these plants to feel normal than eating those pills. Because what those pills did to me was fuck me up, make me do stupid shit. There's one of the things I'm pretty sure I came up with. This one was, and I said it to a kid when he got busted in school. That was like the law enforcement for the Forest Service son, right? And I was like the third on the engine. And I took him under, and you had to be quiet about this stuff. Was the only idiot I ever met that smoked weed was an idiot long before he ever smoked weed, and he just used it as an excuse for his idioticracy. You know, don't take that to heart when they're telling you it's bad. And this was 92, 93 maybe, right? When the full on war on drugs was going hard. Still, we didn't even have medical in California yet.
So it's funny that you brought up like the DARE ages there, because I fucking was proud. I was proud of myself today. How random, I swear, how like random, like throws you random shit. So I'm actually out and about doing my thing today and find myself in a room full of, folks from the DARE age. And again, we're open-minded to the idea of cannabis. And so I sat there and went on my soapbox, about, how cannabis helps, and it isn't just, smoking it, and it is, it's fucking has its medicinal effects, just growing a plant and all this other stuff. And oh man, I actually think I persuaded probably 80% of the room I was talking on. and they were like, a lot of them, were in a spot where had state jobs or whatever, and couldn't they said they might, but but they can't. And I'm like, man, I get you can't, or you won't, or you can't because of your job, but man, doesn't it suck? I mean, you put your heart and soul out for this job, but in the end, you think about it, they're dictating your health and proper, how you can, necessarily take care of yourself properly. And here, like I said, you're going to work every day, putting your life on the line, and can't even dictate your proper health.
See that right there? I was arrested. I've been arrested by federals in America for that much weed in my dorm room. And the cop literally said to me, yeah, man, I wish I could sit around all day getting high too, man, but I got to do this job. Right? If I can, that's the same fucking amount right there. I had 12 machine guns on me, point blank, in Mexico for fucking half a fucking gram. I drove around for hours. I had machine gun fucking imprint bruises in my fucking ribs when we drove around negotiating the bribe to get me the fuck out for my personal fucking medicine. Right? Yeah, it's fucking nuts. I literally drug out of my bed at the age of 18 years old because of this shit, because I had a broken neck 2 years before and opiates didn't do it. And the shit was prohibition, illegal, evil devil's weed. Meanwhile, I was saving people's fucking lives who had cancer, like, and not knowing I had a broken neck. Right? It was the one thing that made me feel like a human being. They say getting feeling high is wrong, and it's like, man, tell you what's wrong. It's feeling like death rolled over. That's fucking wrong, you know. Especially when you have a plant that can change that and make you feel like you want to be alive. And back in the day, we didn't have a clue. Nixon knew. They fucking ran paper. They ran all the information. They knew that it actually like seemed to cure cancer back in the day. And he was trying to prove it was bad so he could have his war on basically people who weren't white and people who were against the war. It was pretty much, you know, like, let's make private prisons and throw all those people who aren't with our agenda in on the basis of that plant. It's fucking nuts. I try to explain to my pop who's going off about how this group or that group's being propagandized as being Hitler, Nazis taking away your rights. It's like, wait a second, those people have been getting thrown in jail for fucking ever for smoking a plant, Dad. Same reason I've been thrown in jail. Who's taking whose rights away, and who's the real dictators, right? You know, Nixon pretty much started that war on drugs. It's, I hate getting political on shit, but it's it is what it is. It's there's freedom right there, right? That's but yeah, I've literally and here in Utah, before I got my declaration of my First Amendment in place, and these people started understanding they can't come into my house without a warrant looking for whatever the fuck because some neighbor says I'm beating my child on drugs just because she doesn't want a hippie living next door to her no more. It's I had three warrantless searches of my home at one point in the past 10 years. And I got thrown in jail on false charges and shit because I couldn't even find my weed. And they made shit up. And I was 46 days in the county. I ended up losing my farm. Right? It's real. You know, we still have states in America where people are a fucking dime bag and they're going into private prisons. Right? It's well, literally, you know, we supposedly we have medical here, but it's a joke. But we're in that stage right now where it's like the gray area between going from, and there's a lot of fear of people in the gray market are about to get clamped on and stuff. And there's talk about that in the community. And but our medical program's a fucking square wheel. I know some people that are in growing on it and stuff, and I was saying all along this is a square wheel engineered program. And we have the highest price of cannabis in the nation. It's like 25% higher than California's tax recreational cannabis. And it's like never enough there's nothing in stock type of thing. You know, yeah, it is what it is. We had an amazing people's initiative we put through that allowed for caregivers and stuff like that, and everyone having enough of what they need for what their ailment is. But it happens that our legislators, was it the speaker of the Senate, happens to be the largest distributor of opiate drugs in America through his pharmacies in southern Utah. It's like literally drug war. Like, you got to be fucking kidding me. It's literally they repress expanded Medicaid because more people who don't have access to medical use opiates. They repress the medical cannabis because they know they would be losing their opiate money. And it's nuts how many friends I have that I do not have anymore who I could have cured and healed with this plant, who are dead because of using big pharma and the ignorance of the greed of our capitalist system.
Saying that the other night, when I have lost way too much family, a whole lot of friends to the pharmaceutical machine. I often say that this push that we see, and I'm grateful for it, that for the recreational cross country, is like a divide and conquer, like fucking look over there, look over there. That one last, suppression to keep from marijuana from being the real medicine that it should be. That's
Idaho
what they're doing. They're
last
fucking,
state.
they're like holding it down, and they're like, go there, and smoke it. Don't even think about, let us continue to pump out our poison. You guys just think about recreational. Don't even think about medical stuff. And what's going to happen at that point is fucking rec will go through, the fucking big money will take over. They'll lock down the fucking you can't grow at home bullshit, which is fucking bullshit because you should be able to grow it anyway. And then the pharmaceutical end, there'll be somewhat of a loss of interest in it because, you know what I mean? The money's no longer, the cards aren't there. Nobody's pulling it, the cards, so there won't be enough data to go, hey, look at all these cards. People are,
The horse is out of the
using
barn.
this, you know what I mean?
The
It'll
horse
all
is out of
kind
the
of
barn.
dwindle.
The corral
It'll
gate
win.
is open. The horse is out of the barn and the corral gate's open. They're not going to be able to stop the people anymore. The knowledge,
They
the
won't be
knowledge,
able to stop it. They're trying to slow it.
sure, but it's like it took alcohol 80 years to recover from prohibition proper to where we had regional home brew or regional microbreweries literally at 10% of what there was before prohibition occurred. Okay. So at the year 2000, we had 90% expansion capacity of microbreweries still compared to pre-prohibition numbers per capita. It took that fucking long for people to get past that fucking the whole we had prohibition, all that small production got shut down, and the only person they could produce was big money, and they produced pretty mid-grade, low bottom grade pilsners, right? No body to them, no flavor to them. Started pumping rice into it and stuff like that for mass production for Soma for the working class, right? But eventually we got around and Samuel Adams, Pete's Wicked Ale, Sierra Nevada started popping up in the mid 80s, right? And then boom, by
What happened with
2000,
that? They
this
outlawed fucking home brewery for the longest time. We just
right,
got
right, right,
that
right,
back.
right, 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 right. No, man, this is the progression of it. Here in Utah, it was illegal to have a keg. It was a felony to have a keg when I moved here in '97, right? But there was brew shops all where you could buy everything you need and produce a keg. Okay, there was by 2000 we had a grow shop, but the police would sit outside and follow you home, right? And that lasted until a couple of lawsuits at about 2005 maybe. That got shut down because there was people, you have no probable cause. I am a gardener buying fucking garden supplies. Does not mean I'm breaking the law because I live in the fucking winter desert and I want to grow stuff in my house, right? And that literally was happening where we had college students who were students of mine as an organic farmer. Literally, like I wasn't teaching them how to grow organic cannabis. I was in the fucking closet with that totally forever. But wherever I farmed, wherever I taught teaching, that stuff is like, well, make sure you're not bringing any marijuana, you're not growing the marijuana on our farm field that you're leasing from us and stuff. Like, no, I'm not. I don't. We're in Utah. Why the fuck would I jeopardize your ownership? But so these young college students who I would teach basically at farmers market, I would teach lessons to people as they walk by, and we'd strike conversation. I'd totally change the entire culture of food and stuff with these conversations and what restaurants were using. And part of it was these kids would start these micro gardens in the basement growing microgreens or things out of season to where we could plant out or just whatever it was. But and the landlords were calling the police on them. It's like, I got vegetables in the basement. It's all, but part of that knowledge did come from it. It bounces off was like, how do we grow cannabis indoors? And so, but that's all part of the progression and the evolution. And now, like we have distilleries in Utah, right? And you can go and ski in and ski out of a distillery and buy shots and ski away. We just recently, a year, 18 months ago, we now no longer is 3.2 the standard. You can buy 5.0 beer in the grocery store now, and they pour it on tap. And forever we had that 3.2 standard. So things progress, and even the most regressive conservative state, right? And Utah is a straight theocracy, conservative. It's considered to be the conservative harbinger, and where conservative laws emanate out, like California's where the liberal laws radiate out to the nation from, get tested and whatnot. Yeah, so it's inevitable the whole country will eventually have, and this horse is out of the cage, and there's people like me putting seed out in for folks to express their freedom. And it, whether you're a Christian protectionist like I am, or you're a fundamentalist Christian, it says in that front pages of the Bible that God gave us all the plants, and when he saw his creation, he called it good. There's nothing in any of these plants that isn't, I call them entheogen. God is within the plant itself. I can heal the worst of man's disease with this thing that God gave us. In our Christian Bible, it talks about the cannabis oil, the holy anointing oil that was used by the priests when they would go around the Holy of Holies, which contained the Ark of the Covenant. And whatever this Ark of Covenant was, it was a very powerful energy source of some sort or other. And they would slather themselves with this cannabis oil, which was 6 pounds of cannabis and 5 gallons of olive oil or something along those lines. 9 pounds of cannabis and 6 gallons of oil. Anyhow, that's prescribed 3 times in the Old Testament to the priests of the Judah. Yeah, so this stuff, and then we can show in just about any tradition of religion where we consider the higher power gave us the plants, and that's, even if you are not of any religious persuasion, it is your First Amendment right to choose the medicines and your state of mind, and no one's ever been harmed by this plant. So there's no legal, no scientific reason to restrict it, to call it a crime. And if we look at the history of why it became illegal, that in itself was a crime against humanity. It was strictly a combination of corporate greed and racism. Straight up, that combination is what made this plant illegal in the first place, and then it was secondarily what kept it and forced its illegality in the 70s. And yeah, here we are pushing it back into the realm of freedom, and it's a long fight, It was 91 when I went before Governor Brown's council on offshore oil drilling, and went off and started spewing off about how we need to stop doing that and grow our fuel. And I did 30 minutes talking about cannabis then, right? This is slowly, sure, but that
That's funny
critical
because we
mass.
haven't even cracked that door yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
we haven't even hit that point where
no.
we've started using it as a biomass.
No.
Or, you know what I mean? Fuels, plastic, hempcrete, building materials, clothes. We haven't even scratched that yet.
Yeah, no, and part of it has to do with that whole banking legality thing. And I know hemp is still in this gray zone, right? We kind of got some banking and all, but that's once that stuff opens, I've been trying for years to bring people in. I have a whole other side project with my initials with American Revolution Hemp Corporation, and just trying to bring people in and understanding the need for the infrastructure. And on my kitchen door, I have a hemp seed processor for my vision board. is literally the only thing on my vision board is this hemp seed processor, because I want to have that where we're processing fiber and seed for the things that we can use these things for, besides, you know, whether it's our soma or our medicine. It's so much more bigger, diverse than that. Feeding animals more healthily. Yeah, building lighter aircraft and cars out of it that require less fuel to move from here to there. You can literally make aircraft jet engine fuel from hemp, right? It's then we're not talking the ethanol. It's the seed oil can be refined into, whereas most people talk about the most economically viable is the ethanol made from the herds, right? And the same thing we use for the hempcrete is those herds. Super diverse, and we haven't tapped the surface. Mulholland Boulevard in California, right? Most of us have all heard of that street. It's named after a fellow who had a vision when there wasn't enough water in California to grow the crops there, to feed the people that are there, right? But this guy had this vision, and he brought water to Southern California, right? And now we have the hugest economy in the fucking world. And that's what I try and explain to people is you have that vision with this hemp infrastructure. It's going to be on that fucking level of magnitude, order of magnitude of how different the world will be, right? Maybe in a slightly better way than the 20 million people in California do in California, right? Which California is awesome. I wouldn't be me if it wasn't for California being California, right?
So, Alex, chat says you need to either puff it, chill them, or pass it.
I did pack it, didn't I? I got the microphone, man. I'm talking. I'm talking. I got the microphone here. I'll give you a flame here.
At one point, Cass in chat was like, "What's that? What's that in his hand?" We're like, "It's chill." They've been talking about it for a few minutes. What do you, I don't think you've told us what you even had packed in it. What do you have packed in there?
This is labeled Alpha. That's all it says. This is a descendant of Dr. Dream, and really earthy. I take it outside and all the skunks. I mean, my house is saturated with loud, and so it's kind of hard to really discern flavors, and don't have to take it like up on the mountain where it's clean air. But my mouth is just exploding with flavors right now. Like I had some culinary delight, right? Some gastronomic phenomena. There's like hints of lime and earth and dank in the back of my mouth right now. And so I've been trying to bring this Dr. Dream All Cure that I have into a seed form. And so many venues of ways I've been trying to do this, and hybridizing it and back crossing it, and I'm finding like as I cross these land races into it, it's so diverse of how it responds. And then when I back cross it, it still stays open in these different. And I realize I'm like, this thing hermaphrodite, I have seed from before I brought any other genetics into the house again. And I went back to them and opened them up, and some people like don't understand, and I don't understand how this works, but I can get males coming out of feminized seed. And the best of my understanding is it has to do with temperature and nutrient availability. And anyhow, I popped open so many of this one. I found a certain pack of these older in Hermes seed that I kept, bag seed, and I popped them all open, and I had actually fairly 50-50 ratio, 60-40 with males. And so I ran through, and most of the females weren't that great. I kept one out of like a dozen females. And then I took I took 4 of the males and I back crossed them back into Dr. Dream, and I ran tests of them. And that's what we got right here is I ran through, I tested like 20 or 30 of each of them, and I selected through, found 1 male, and I found 8 females. So I'm going to go through and search those males again a little further, but I crossed them, and this is one of those from a particular male that put off just these amazing menthols, chocolate menthols. But I ask other people what they take, and they get completely different takes as what that tastes and smells like. And yeah, so I'm trying to get my best understanding of these descendants of Dr. Dream. I'm trying to figure out how to best serve the greater community by how I move forward on reproducing or attempting to put this into a seed form. This was a 60-day chop. I just cut them all right at 60 days to see how, with the amount of breeding I do, I get very little opportunity to actually dial a strain in. And so I have to sometimes take a parameter to test against and see where it sits. And then after I've made my choices, come back and try and refine things. Yeah, so this has rare earth, dank, funk, menthol, heavy menthol. When I give it a squeeze, there's this fuel that comes out and almost burns the nostril. But there's also like this softness to it that's like when you're laying in soft, fresh cut grass in the summertime. Not that grassy smell, but that softness feeling. It gets me really high. It kills the pain. It doesn't couch lock me. I'm really yeah. That's what I'm sharing the best of my ability with y'all tonight is my alpha from I believe that was what I had tagged as purple male. I had pink, light pink, yellow, and purple male. And you know, I change my coding as I go through sessions of breeding because there might be like 1 through 60, right? And then but then I have alpha, beta, theta, and delta, and I'm trying to keep no more than 4, but I'm moving towards selecting 4 of each as I move, especially in the F2 stage where there's such diversity. And it's like, man, I did all that work of running through 60 of them. Fuck, if I made the wrong choice, and quite often it's like there is a huge distinction between those 4. And which direction is like, man, if I just took one, I fucked that whole project up, right? It ain't ever gonna progress. So I'm finding running those multiple choice examinations, and that's something I really got to attribute back to Sam the Skunk Man. And when you see some of his breeding project papers where he literally would have 10 of each at each stage, 10 males and 10 females, and he would pollinate a branch of each female with the pollen from each male, and then he would grow out the progeny of that. So you're literally looking at thousands and thousands of possibilities that he's searching through to find that specific skunk that he went with back in the day. But I never got it out of him. I've had conversations with him. He has an alias on Facebook, and he doesn't engage a whole lot of people. He's old and crotchety. He's older and crotchety than I am by a generation. And there's not a whole lot of people who can even contemplate what he's got to say or converse on that level. And so like I'm here and he's like way the fuck up there, right? But here I like everyone else is down there. So he'll spar with me a little bit and pick on me a little bit, and I'll ask him questions, but I've never gotten out of him how come skunk went sweet and floral, and how come he can't get it back to where it was, especially with all he does now, he doesn't do any traditional heirloom breeding or that Punnett squares like he was doing. He does completely now through genomics in a laboratory in a genetic selection process. And yeah, that's
So
what I'm
Red
talking.
Pill wanted me to tell you thank you for he's going to name his seed company. Or yeah. I'm gonna make sure that's right. He says, Eagle, can you thank Alex for naming my seed company Snakes and Sparklers?
Yeah, yeah. But pass it to where it comes from is Joe Dirt, man. Life's a garden. Dig it. Excellent, man. That's fucking history making tonight. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for seeing who I am. Yeah, passing that on. That's what I talk about. These ripples in the pool, and boom, here's the story. All right, and this is probably we'll close out after I tell this story. I ran the inmate fire crew, right? And these guys were degenerates of mankind in prison for crimes committed against humanity, right? And they're serving their time, okay? And some of these guys murdered people. One guy, and I never asked anybody their story. I didn't want to necessarily know. My little brother at the same time was in prison in California. It's really weird because he was on work release and he would get out and make 3 times as much money on his union job than I was running this inmate group. And then I'd go home to my little apartment on the weekends by myself because I didn't know anybody here, sit in a little 4-room, and then all the guys that worked for me would go home on home furloughs on the weekend. It's a really crazy little dichotomy of reality, right? But because I am who I am and that golden rule permeates everything I do, I treated these people as my firefighter crew and forestry crew and not as a bunch of inmates. They were human beings that I worked and dealt with every day, right? And I taught them woodcraft. Okay, I taught them how to live in the woods and experience life in the forest. I taught them everything I knew about being out there. I taught them how to shit in the woods, literally, right? And it's something that you all listening probably don't know how to shit in the woods. And there is a proper way and improper ways to shit in the woods. There's actually a book how to shit in the woods. But I treated every one of these human beings as a human being with respect of a human being. And a lot of these guys had never had that in their entire life. Okay. And at first they hated me because I expected them to be my fire crew, not a bunch of inmates. Right. And I come from a tradition of excellence in firefighting. And this is the ripples in the pool. The at one point, I wasn't on the job for a month, I don't think, and they almost killed me. They hated me so much for working them hard at physical therapy every day, physical training. I'm sorry, PT, right? And I'd make them hike lock and step, just like every other hotshot fire crew. And we didn't have any fucking fires. It was raining, and they just wanted to go fishing or have their free time after whatever. So after our little insurrection and mutiny, and they had to go back to prison, and then they went out with the other foresters and realized that Alex was actually not that bad. These people don't treat us as human beings. And so when we went back out, they had a whole different set of respect for me and started understanding that I was training them for this thing we're going to do is go fight a fire. And we eventually went and fought a fire, and things kind of clicked. But I started developing a rapport with these guys who they gave me this utmost respect, and they would do whatever I asked of them. And it ended up coming to the end of my job through the long run with the correction officers felt very threatened by my presence because the inmates would respond to them telling them something to do. Did Alex tell you to tell us to do that? So it really threatened their authority, and it kind of sucked. And I wasn't meaning to do that, but these guys developed such a respect for me, and we had such a rapport. It didn't matter what the religion was or whatever came up. You know, they were human beings. They were my firefighters, and I wasn't there to put them down or demean them or anything like that. Well, So time went on, and I had to leave that job. They accused me of providing drugs to the inmates, which never happened, and none of them ever said that happened. But they all agreed that yeah, he's probably smoking weed. And I was dealing with, I did not know I was still suffering severe injuries from my spinal injuries, my broken neck, and nerve stuff. And we ran chainsaws all the time. And so, and, you know, at one point the guys even found my stash had fallen out of my pocket. And they just taxed it a little bit, gave it back to me. And there was another point where we went and stayed in the cabin of state property, and they went in the house and ransacked it, and they actually found an ounce and thought I left it there. It's like, no, I didn't do that, you know, but enjoy it, guys. But you know, I had to leave that job, and I went on. Right after I left that job, my girlfriend, who was one of these people who I could have saved if I knew then what I knew now about cannabis and big pharma and stuff, but she went off cold turkey off her meds and ended up committing suicide. And so, having lost the job I thought I went to college for, having lost the woman I was thinking I was going to ask to marry me and spend my life with, I was a pretty dismal fucking human being. And I was in a pretty shitty way. And you can read, I wrote a book, it describes a lot of this situation. And this actual whole story is in print there. And it's about firefighting and defending your farm. You learn how to defend your farm if you live in fire country, whatever. But so what ends up happening is I get hired onto the helicopter repeller crew, and our first fire of the year, I come down back to Utah to Idaho, and we land on this fire on this mountain, and there's my inmates. These guys that I had trained over a couple of years, and they're working this fire, and eventually it's just my helicopter and the inmate crew left on the fire, and everyone else has left the fire. It's done, it's out, and we're flying the guys off, and we have to shut down. Winds came up when the helicopter landed for fuel, and he couldn't take off. So we're stuck on top of the mountain. It's me and 13 of these inmates who I had trained and fought fires with and gone through some pretty gnarly situations. And correction officers take off and do their thing. They're looking for arrowheads. And the guys could tell I'm kind of like out of it. I'm still depressed from my situation with having lost that job, having Laura kill herself, and just being, you know, it's a major fucking shock. It lasts a while, right? And so we're sitting around in a circle, and the guys, you know, I tell them where I'm at in life, and they're like, it's all right, it's gonna get better, Alex. You always told us it's gonna be okay. And one by one, they started thanking me. And the things they started thanking me was like, Alex, when I met you, I had never had a job in my life, and now I have a work ethic, right? Another one says, I met you, I was 300 pounds, I was way overweight, and now I'm a lean, mean 185 machine, right? Another guy says, no one had ever given me respect in my entire life, and now I have self-respect. And so 13 offers of gratitude and thanks from these men who'd been the dregs of society, and I just treated as human beings because that's how I wanted to be treated, and I wouldn't expect anything else one way or the other, right? That didn't just affect them. It bounced back to me, right? But it didn't just do that. Those people were so changed that it changed their family, it changed their parents, it changed their children, it changed their wife's spouse, right? And so when you live true to who you really believe and understand that we should be, and you don't do things that go against that golden rule, when you truly be a human being, right? And you're one with the one song, the universe, and you treat us all, and you understand that we are all connected. And that shit, those waves are still reverberating from that it was 20 years ago when this all happened, right? And those people, if it was just one man whose life I changed, right? That's 20 more people around him, and that's 20 people around them. Okay, so be your best, grow your best, and you know that you do change the world around you by everything you do. You know, had I not treated those people with respect and dignity, right? They could have been gone back to the murder. They could have gone back to thieving. They could have gone back to, you know, and brought their children up the same way. And where would the world be, right? So that was the story I brain farted before, and it came back around, and yeah.
Notice how it came back around at the appropriate time where you wanted to share something, on a good note before you left. See,
Yeah.
things work out at the appropriate times. I believe that I believe that. I believe that. To be honest. I've had a great night, man. For the second time, I've had a great conversation with you, and I'm looking forward to you popping back on and talking. We'll maybe next time we'll pop on. We'll talk to strictly hash, something that we both enjoy as well.
Hey, there's always, I got lots to learn about where modern hash has gone. I don't really fully understand the little isolator method, right? I've watched a few videos of it. I think I got a grip of it. I've never tried it. Never had a little isolator, right? Yeah. Like I said, when I teach, I learn, and there's so much more to be known about this plant. Nobody can be an expert of it all, you know. Uh, there's I know how I dry sift, and I know that's something I've gotten down to that science art realm. But you definitely, I'm sure you got stuff you can teach me about how things have progressed.
Or we could we don't have to talk about anything in particular there. We just have a good conversation. We seem to vibe pretty well, and it could be. I think we could have another good conversation even about just spirituality and like herbal medicine. Uh, that'd be a fun road to travel down. One thing
Yeah.
I want to pick up. One thing I picked up about your your story there at the end. You talked about that energy you put out, that vibe you put out. Talk a lot about frequencies. When you put out vibes is a frequency. Frequency is a wave. Waves are very powerful. No matter how, even though we don't see them, we don't necessarily realize how powerful. I mean, you think about radio frequency, radio signal. If we're putting out our frequency, our signal with enough strength, it bounces off radio, 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 radio. And where is it? Traveling endlessly through
Yep.
space.
Oh yeah.
That message can be picked up forever if it's put out with enough strength and heart. So, good point, my butt. Good
Yeah. Yeah.
point.
Yeah. No,
That's what I picked up from that.
there's definitely, that's a whole rabbit hole, is metaphysics, physics, astrophysics, and quantum physics, and then tying that into the ancient knowledge of the great religions, right? And that stuff, it's all one big wisdom, and you can't really, to really understand any of it, it's like, wow, this shit's all one knowledge, right? And you get to that akashic realm where it's like the understanding all exists. It's a matter of us encountering it, and through different modes of information transfer. Everything's energy. Yeah. No, these are whole massive conversations about where that ain't solid. It's just our perception of it that we project out of our brain that comes back as an equal and opposite reaction of our perception. Yeah. We can. There's definitely plenty to talk about. I actually went in one of the subsequent shows I was listening in, and I heard we're the same age. I was like, what? Like, I thought you were maybe 30 something, right? And I'm like, wow, okay, whole different perspective. All of a sudden, boom, we're so I'm 71 model. Are you 70, 71, 72? You're right there, aren't you?
72. I'm
Yeah.
72. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Now
Still
eventually the spirit.
kicking good along, I think. I'm trying anyway. It's all attitude. It's all attitude, I think. I think you're right there with me on that.
Man, when I was a youth and I moved up into the mountains the first time, and I encountered people who were encroaching 50 who looked like they were in their mid 20s. And it was like, yeah, that's basically what everyone was asking, like, how are you so young? It's like, we are. We don't stress. We don't live the rat race. We don't worry about that. We chose a whole different set of parameters. And it doesn't age us. Yeah, and that's where attitude kicks in, and that frequency you move on, and what do you choose to strive after? You know, what demons do you put before yourself to battle? Um, yeah.
Very wise, man. I can't wait for the next round. I can't wait for the next round. I got let's get some reps, man. You have had a big day today, but man, I am looking forward to the next round. And I think you single-handedly have sealed the gift basket legend fucking
Dude,
ever. I
I
don't
I
think
I never
I
got to
think
see
the episode that episode that I can't wait to fade will fade, but the gift basket will never die.
man. I wanted to go back and see the beginning of that and follow the entire flow of energy through there. That's definitely a study on human mental dynamics. I used to do stuff with the in college and with the inmates where I literally, so I used to study things like what is mob mentality and how people react in different situations and how groupthink happens, and I used to do literally experiments where I could control people's movements in a room by conversation or body movements or body language, or even so I would do experiments with the inmates with planting and seeding a rumor and watching how it progressed through a bunch of people based on emotion or fact. And so that was just watching that whole thing, the counterance, and then at the end it was like, whoa, I missed a lot of something just blew up here. I thought
Yeah,
this was just going along like that, and I was like, woo.
yeah, that one will safely be tucked away. Yeah, I don't. That was. I don't honestly. You want to look back. I don't want to ever look back. I don't know where the fuck that thing spun out of control.
You
To be
know,
honest with you.
there's definitely miscommunication. There's definitely hormones. There was definitely a couple of different things,
Yeah.
definitely different aspects were playing in on that, and you know, I've always found miscommunication tends to be we all have these different perspectives, right? I hew back on this a bunch of times. Is like we don't always understand where one person's coming from or what the I say this. George Carlin puts it like this: the average Joe you meet's an idiot. Therefore, by definition, half of them are worse than that. And I changed it to, therefore, by definition, half of us are worse than that, because I know that I could be doing my utmost best, most honed in, skilled art craft that I could ever pull off in whatever it is that I'm doing. And there's some Joe over here who's watching me going, what the fuck is that idiot doing? From his perspective, right? It's all fucking wrong. And that's because we've all crossed these. And so even just hearing things, it can be disharmonious in that frequency energy flow if we don't understand the exact context it was meant from here to there. It's yeah.
Either way, I'm glad you stuck around.
Gift baskets.
Again, I still think
I
that's
noticed.
just hilarious. You actually got my day rolling with that because seriously, this is like last night today. I completely and forgot about it. To be honest with you, completely. Lexi come home yesterday. She says you got to slip in the mail for a box. I'm like, I'm not expecting anything. And then I kind of fucking sleep in there a little bit today. And then I fucking kind of roll over one eye, check my shit, and I Instagram. I'm thinking, oh man, I gotta, because I sent you the message last night to, see if we were still on. And I wanted
Right.
to see if you'd verify. And I look and it says, what, check your mail, check the box. And I'm like, oh shit, that's right. I gotta go. So I jumped out of bed. I had to fucking go to get some shit done anyway. And I run up there and I'm like, oh, this is fucking priceless. This is fucking priceless. So I actually got the gift box this round, and he actually made the legend kind of come true.
Stay tuned, everybody. Eventually, my birthdays. I wish I could have done it this year. I just turned 50 last Friday. But eventually, I'm going to have Pippi Longstocking style birthdays going down where I send the gifts out to everybody. Right, and that's I can't do it now.
Have to officially return the favor though. See, you're slowly building the legend there.
It's that one. The way you return that favor there is truly is you spread it. The spread that thing around and see how far it goes, like the red balloons, right? And the ripples in the ripples in the pool. See where that thing goes. That's
that I can do. She's pretty too. She's got a lot of good structure to her. She's ready to take off.
Man, I bred her all pretty much outdoors, and I just ran her inside for the first time. Yeah, just solid from the base all the way up.
I can't wait. I'll keep you informed. I will most definitely keep you informed. That's for sure. But hopefully, I can show you live here the next time you're out. I'll just take you to the tour.
Yeah. No, I try and turn on like when I'm falling asleep or whatever. Something it's like I said, you're usually going when I'm falling asleep. So it's I'm not always on the chat. I try and listen to shows when I can, and I love what you're doing. Appreciate you bringing me in to say hi to folks and share the love and the information and understanding, and it's really a big picture, and yeah, cool.
I love the information and the story, so we'll do this again soon, my friend.
Excellent. I've got a lifetime's worth of it. Thanks for listening, everybody.
So, you do know that? Well, I gotta refresh you. I gotta refresh you both. We're 364. I am looking for that sound bite. That invitation is still good for the wormholes anytime you want to jump in.
Yeah. I actually that basket show was the first. I almost jumped in there. I'm like, man, her energy is so intense. I don't know if anyone's gonna join her. And then all of a sudden it started going. I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna join this.
I don't blame.
Well, I'll hop in at some point here.
That's fucking hilarious. All right.
Gift baskets.
Oh no.
Wait. Give me the number again. I was trying to write it down, but 360.
364.
64.
364 right. For this. 364. For the sound bite. I'm ready whenever you are, sir.
Hey everybody, this is Alex Hardy from Hardy Gear, and I'm here on episode 364 with Talking Shit with Eagle. And you guys are listening to the goods.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. I greatly appreciate your time, your information, and stories. Have a great night, and we'll be doing this very, very soon, my friend.
Cool, yo. Appreciate you all. Peace out.
One more time, where can they find you? You got to make sure they can find you.
HARTIGEAR on Instagram. Harty Gear. And the other is through the Future Cannabis Project, you can find my gear on a proper checkout website on Dagga.love, DAGGA.love. That's the bank that's carrying me.
Gotta make sure to point that out. Gotta make sure to point that. That's the important one.
Yeah. You know, I'm money is like we all need it to survive, but it's not my number one objective. So I forget about all that.
Well, you got to look at it this way, though. It may not be the objective, but you do want people to find that gear. So
We do.
they got to
We
be
do. And
able to find
you know,
that gear.
he's able to present about 10% of what I have on hand, if even, and then I have maybe 10% of what's in my vault that I have in packs. There's a lot there. Cool.
All right. Well, we'll do this again soon. Thank you.
Appreciate y'all.
For the rest of you guys, if you guys are interested in picking up and hanging out till the 4:20-ish hour, look for me to wind this up and load up again in the wormhole. Thank you guys for tuning in this amazing episode. I greatly appreciate it. You guys know the deal. Random acts of kindness do save lives. Please do something nice for somebody. We are out of here. Love you guys. Thank you, Alex. Thank you,